The silver lightning also finally vanished at this moment. Standing right before the white barrier of light was a completely black giant ghost that was over 100 feet tall. This ghost had a pair of horns on its head, and its entire body was covered in black scales, creating a suit of natural armor. There was also a pair of fleshy bat-like wings on its back, as well as a pair of extraordinarily long arms that hung straight down to the ground, and appeared as if they had been forged from fine iron. Even Han Li was struck by a bone-chilling sensation when casting his gaze toward the ghost's face. This ghost's face was completely flat and devoid of facial features. Furthermore, its massive body was riddled with holes, and no part of it was left unscathed aside from its two massive long arms. It was quite clear that this ghost had withstood most of the power from the lightning beads and sword chi that Han Li had unleashed. Otherwise, they would have been more than enough to destroy the white barrier of light protecting the crimson sword. The giant ghost raised its head and let loose a shrill howl, following which countless bursts of black yin chi appeared around it before disappearing into its body. In the blink of an eye, it had completely regenerated to full health. A sinister voice suddenly sounded beside Han Li's ear. He, experience the horror of this faceless ghost monarch that I've been nurturing for thousands of years, you nosy brat. This ghost is no less powerful than I am. Ghost monarch, a peculiar expression appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this. Be careful, fellow Taoist Han. Faceless ghost monarchs are vastly renowned beings of the ghostly realm, and they're no less powerful than spatial tempering cultivators. A female voice was then transmitted to him, and it belonged to none other than Yi Chu. After witnessing Han Li detaining Xiao Hong so easily, a hint of hope had arisen in her heart. Almost at the exact same moment, the ghost monarch turned its head toward Han Li. Even though it had no eyes, it seemed to still be able to detect Han Li's presence. It let loose a low roar as it suddenly raised its arms into the air. Violent winds were immediately swept up as black yin chi swelled, causing the surrounding sky to dim significantly. At the same time, countless howls of despair rang out from within the yin chi, making it appear as if there were countless ghosts lurking within. Standing beneath the yin chi up above, the faceless ghost monarch swept its arms toward Han Li. The yin chi in the air swirled violently, instantly manifesting an unfathomably gargantuan black ghostly claw. The claw was over 1,000 feet in size, and azure ghostly flames were shimmering over its surface as it slowly descended toward Han Li. Han Li felt the air tighten around him as an enormous invisible power appeared out of nowhere, attempting to completely immobilize him. If a normal cultivator were in Han Li's position, they would most likely be powerless to resist this immense force. However, Han Li was able to simply disregard it, such was the power of his current body. After letting loose a cold harumph, he rapidly swept a hand over his spirit beast bracelet. A burst of black light shot forth before circling around, then landing around 10 feet in front of Han Li. It was a small monkey with glossy black fur that was around half a foot tall. It was none other than the weeping soul beast. As soon as the little monkey appeared, it surveyed its surroundings before sniffing at the air, following which its eyes immediately lit up. It pounded its chest with its fists as its body rapidly expanded amid a burst of brilliant black light. Following just a few flashes, it had transformed into a massive ape that was over 300 feet tall. The ape let loose a loud harumph as it looked up at the ghostly claw in the sky above, expelling a streak of azure light from its nostrils that struck the palm of the descending ghostly claw with unerring accuracy. An incredible scene ensued. In the instant that the azure light made contact with the ghostly claw, a black hole immediately appeared at the center of the latter's palm. The azure light then continued to wreak havoc, reducing the other parts of the ghostly claw to inky black yin chi before being swept up by the light. The entire ghostly claw was soon in tatters and dissipated amid specks of black light. The faceless ghost monarch immediately grabbed the air toward the weeping soul beast upon seeing this. 5 black streaks of light instantly hurtled toward the giant ape like 5 massive blades. The sound of air being parted rang out as the claw projections swept toward the giant ape. However, they merely disappeared into the weeping soul's body without having any effect whatsoever. The giant ghost couldn't help but falter upon seeing this. The giant ape completely disregarded its stunned reaction, as it let loose another loud harumph to expel a second streak of azure light from its nostrils. The 2 streaks of azure light intertwined and flashed through the air, sweeping up the residual yin chi up above like a gust of autumn wind lapping up fallen leaves. The streaks of light then shot back toward the giant ape before being swallowed. A pleased expression appeared on the weeping soul beast's face, following which it turned its attention toward the ghost monarch in the distance. At this moment, the faceless ghost monarch finally recovered from its shock, and it let loose a cry of violent rage. All of a sudden, an antiquated suit of armor surfaced over its body, upon which azure flames were burning incessantly. At the same time, a pair of white bone war hammers had appeared in its grasp. And Lee focused his gaze on those war hammers to discover that they had been refined from the skulls of two massive demonic ghosts. One of the war hammers was sweeping up gusts of yellow winds, while the other had black mist swirling around it, and Han Li wondered what kind of abilities they possessed. Meanwhile, the weeping soul beast paid no heed to the pair of war hammers at all, as it blinked and blasted forth the two streaks of azure light from its nostrils again, both of which headed straight for the massive ghost. The faceless ghost monarch swung its two war hammers through the air, and a vast expanse of black light immediately surfaced before swatting the azure light aside with ease. The weeping soul beast's soul-devouring light had been dispelled by this ghost monarch. Han Li's expression changed slightly upon seeing this. The weeping soul beast also adopted a solemn look as it let loose a low roar. Yin winds were immediately swept up around it as countless arcs of lightning flashed in the surrounding area. The giant ape's body swelled once again as its fur began to turn red. Three crooked horns slowly sprouted from the top of its head, while its glabella bulged before splitting open, revealing a crimson demonic eye. At the same time, its face elongated and it bared its fangs in a menacing manner. Three black bone spikes that were around 10 feet in length each also appeared on its back, and sinister black yin qi was swirling around them. The weeping soul beast had undergone a transformation into a sinister, malicious ghost. The yin qi swirling around its body seemed to be even more powerful than that of the faceless ghost monarch, and as soon as the demonic eye on its glabella opened, a bolt of lightning that was as thick as a large bowl shot forth amid a resounding boom. The arc of lightning was as red as blood and instantly reached the faceless ghost monarch. An incredible turn of events then unfolded. In the face of this crimson arc of lightning, the faceless ghost monarch let loose a roar of utter shock and horror. It abruptly brought its war hammers together, and at the same time, its enormous body hurtled back in retreat, seemingly intending on fleeing for its life. Two muffled thumps erupted as the pair of white bone war hammers came into contact with the arc of crimson lightning. However, the war hammers were instantly reduced to plumes of smoke, as if they had encountered the very bane of their existence. In contrast, the arc of crimson lightning hadn't been impeded even in the slightest, and it went on to strike the faceless ghost monarch's suit of azure flaming armor. The suit of armor met the same fate as the pair of war hammers, dissipating without posing any resistance. As such, the arc of lightning punctured the ghost monarch's chest before binding around its body like a spirit snake, then towing it back toward the weeping soul beast. The giant ghost let loose a howl of anguish as it was forcibly wrenched toward the massive ape's cavernous mouth. Following a flash of crimson light, the giant ghost was swallowed by the weeping soul beast. The mighty faceless ghost monarch, which was supposed to be comparable in power to a spatial tempering cultivator, had just been subdued and devoured by the weeping soul beast with ease. On this occasion, the two Long family cultivators, as well as Yi Chu and Yi Ying, were all completely flabbergasted. This wasn't some kind of insignificant ghostly minion, it was a powerful ghost monarch. How could it have been crushed like a papier-mâché structure like this? Just what kind of spirit beast was this shape-shifting little monkey? And what kind of insane ability was that crimson arc of lightning that it had just unleashed? The same thoughts were racing through the minds of all four cultivators. However, before they had recovered from their shock, Han Li's body flashed, and he instantly arrived before the white barrier of light. He swept a sleeve through the air, and 72 streaks of azure light shot forth in a frenzy. Brilliant spiritual light flashed as they instantly combined to form a giant golden sword that was around 100 feet in length. The giant sword only flashed once before striking the light barrier with ferocious might. A crisp crack sounded as golden and white light intertwined with one another, and a thin white line appeared on the white light barrier. Crap! Both of the Long family cultivators had clearly underestimated the power of Han Li's flying swords, and expressions of shock immediately appeared on their faces. Meanwhile, the light barrier tremored before crumbling with that thin white line as the center from which all the cracks stemmed. The white barrier of light had already been reduced to a very fragile state by Han Li's earlier attacks, and his flying swords were able to land the final blow to destroy it. Thus, the blood crystal Mo sword was bared to Han Li. He didn't hesitate even in the slightest as he activated his sword arts. The giant golden sword flashed before abruptly disappearing on the spot, but in the next instant, it reappeared and struck the crimson sword with violent force. A loud clang rang out as piercing golden and red light radiated from the two swords. The giant golden sword tremored in response and was completely repelled. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. He swept his sleeve through the air to hurl forth several silver lightning beads, but the crimson sword remained completely unscathed even in the aftermath of the beads' explosions. The slightly panicked Long family cultivators calmed down again upon seeing this, and one of them cackled in a sinister manner. "Ha ha, just give up, you nosy brat. The blood crystal Mo sword is ranked on the chaotic myriad spirit roll. You think you have what it takes to destroy it." Han Li's expression darkened slightly as he scrutinized the crimson sword. All of a sudden, he pointed a finger at the giant golden sword. Letter 1D453, letter 1D45F, letter 212F, letter 1D626, letter 1D4CC, letter 1D626, letter 1D450, letter 2134, letter 1D4C2. A ringing sound erupted as the giant sword tremored, then split up into 72 small golden swords again amid a flash of brilliant golden light. These smaller swords then manifested several hundred streaks of sword chi, each of which was around a foot in length, and all of them began to circle through the air. Immediately thereafter, Han Li began to chant something as he made a rapid series of hand seals, casting one incantation seal after another. All of the flying swords immediately tremored before dispersing high up in the air, then hurtling toward all directions. Amid a few peculiar flashes of light, all of the golden streaks of sword chi disappeared as if they'd never existed. Han Li had set up the Aureate sword formation with the giant crimson sword at the center, planning to use the formation's astonishing power to force Long Dong's soul out of the sword or to destroy this spirit treasure altogether. The sword formation was set up in mere moments, and as Han Li injected his spiritual power into it, a burst of astonishing spiritual pressure immediately rose up in all directions. With the giant crimson sword at the center, countless glittering golden threads appeared in an area with a diameter of over 1,000 feet. All of these golden threads were slowly converging toward the center. Even though neither of the Long family cultivators had seen the Aureate sword formation before, their hearts still stirred with unease upon seeing this. After glancing at one another, the cultivator who was wielding the crimson book suddenly made a hand seal. The crimson book flipped over a few pages in rapid succession, following which 10 crimson devilish shadows erupted forth and hurtled toward Han Li. Even though they didn't believe that Han Li would be able to destroy the giant crimson sword, they certainly didn't want to allow him to attack the sword without inhibitions or impediment either. These crimson devilish shadows were all extremely blurry, and they appeared in the air close to Han Li following flashes of red light. However, Han Li was prepared for them well in advance, and he let loose a cold harumph as he rubbed his hands together before raising them into the air. Following a string of thunderclaps, a dozen or so arcs of golden light shot forth, striking these crimson shadows in a flash. Most of these devilish shadows were destroyed amid howls of anguish, and the remaining few were also forced back as they let loose cries of agony. Seeing as these devilish shadows had been summoned by a spatial tempering cultivator, they were naturally quite powerful and extremely potent against normal cultivators. They feared no physical attacks nor powers of the 5 elements, so they were extremely troublesome to deal with for the average cultivator. However, due to the dense devilish chi that they were carrying, they were completely dominated by Han Li's divine Devilbane lightning. Of course, they were only vanquished so easily as the improvements in Han Li's cultivation base had made his divine Devilbane lightning vastly more powerful than it had been in the human world. If Han Li was only at the nascent soul stage, these devilish shadows would have most likely been more than capable of taking an attack of that nature from Han Li. Han Li's display of abilities came as another surprise to the 4 cultivators who were locked in battle. However, on this occasion, Han Li didn't wait for the Long family cultivators to summon anything else. Instead, he took the initiative as the weeping soul beast beside him harumphed to send forth a streak of azure light, attacking the 7 crimson-haired malicious ghosts that were fighting Yi Ying. These 7 malicious ghosts were quite powerful, but they naturally couldn't compare to the faceless ghost monarch. As the azure light swept through the air, 3 of them were immediately reduced to clouds of red mist that were forcibly devoured by the weeping soul beast. The other 4 immediately teleported to over 1,000 feet away, thereby avoiding what would have been certain death. As such, the pressure on Yi Ying was significantly eased. She was naturally elated by this development, and she turned her attention to the giant crimson sword that was caught at the center of the sword formation, then toward the two Long family cultivators. She then immediately sent her 5 treasures to assist Yi Chu in battle. Even with their combined powers, the two Long family cultivators were only barely able to keep Yi Chu occupied. With the inclusion of Yi Ying's 5 treasures into the battle, the surrounding purple mist in the air was being quickly forced back. As such, neither of them had any spare capacity to attack Han Li, as they each summoned a small red drum and a blue metal ruler respectively. As the drum was played, a swarm of crimson ghostly hornets was manifested within the purple mist, for sweeping forth amid a loud buzzing sound. Meanwhile, the blue metal ruler twirled on the spot, suddenly tearing open the nearby space to summon a massive octopus-like devilish creature. As soon as the creature appeared, it swept its 8 tentacles toward Yi Chu and Ying with all its might, and only then were the two Long family cultivators just barely able to stabilize the situation. Meanwhile, the Weeping Soul Beast continued to hunt down the 4 fleeing malicious ghosts with its soul-devouring light. The malicious ghosts didn't dare to face the Weeping Soul Beast in battle, but the latter didn't seem capable of chasing down the former in a short time either. Han Li was reassured upon seeing this, and continued to inject more power into his Aureate sword formation. Without intervention from the Long family cultivators, he was confident in his ability to destroy this spirit treasure using his sword formation. Freed from all inhibitions, Han Li was finally able to put the true power of the Aureate sword formation on full display. The countless golden threads finally converged and fell upon the crimson sword. As the golden threads sliced into the giant sword, the horrendous sound of metal grating on metal erupted. Spiritual light flashed from the giant sword in a frenzy as golden and crimson light intertwined with one another. However, the crimson sword then immediately attempted to rise into the air, trying to force its way out of the sword formation. However, there were even more golden threads waiting for it in the air above. As such, the giant sword only managed to rise up for several tens of feet before being forced to descend once again. Without any avenues for the escape, the sword could only continue to withstand the power of the sword formation. Even though it was a spirit treasure, without anyone to wield it, there was no way that it would be able to withstand the might of the sword formation for too long. Mere moments later, the spiritual light emanating from the sword began to dim in the face of the countless golden threads, and it emitted an anguished ringing sound. However, there was no end to the golden threads around it, and they were only becoming brighter and sharper. The sword formation was clearly still growing in power. The two Long family cultivators were stunned upon seeing this from afar, and they unleashed several secret techniques in quick succession, sending forth malicious ghosts and devilish heads to try and stop Han Li. In contrast, Yi Ying and Yi Chu were ecstatic, and they no longer held back as they unleashed an unrelenting assault to keep the two Long family cultivators as well as the ghosts and devils they'd summoned at bay. It would be quite difficult for them to defeat and kill the two Long family cultivators, but keeping them occupied was a relatively easy task. As such, the two Long family cultivators could only continue to stew in rage and frustration as they fended off the attacks from Yi Ying and Yi Chu. The spiritual light continued to be whittled down by the power of the sword formation. All of a sudden, Han Li was greeted by a furious voice transmission from Long Dong. "Brother Han, do you really want to foil my plans? If you destroy this sword, then you'll be a sworn enemy of our Long family from now on. Do you really think the Yi family can protect you?" Han Li completely ignored him and continued to manipulate his sword formation. "What benefits have the Yi family promised you? If you can switch your allegiance, I'm willing to offer twice those benefits." Long Dong switched strategies as his voice took on a beseeching tone. However, Han Li continued to ignore him, and Long Dong ceased his voice transmissions upon seeing this. The crimson sword continued to hover in midair, withstanding the relentless assault from the countless golden threads. When the final speck of spiritual light finally faded from the surface of the sword, a series of thin cracks finally appeared upon it. The cracks weren't very deep, but an immeasurable number of them were being inflicted, and it appeared that the giant sword was going to be shattered at any moment. Han Li faltered slightly upon seeing this, but a thought quickly occurred to him as his expression changed drastically. He let loose a loud cry as his body hurtled back as a streak of azure light, completely abandoning the sword formation in his hasty retreat. Almost at the exact same moment, the cries of a dragon and a phoenix erupted from within the crimson sword at the same time, following which it exploded amid a resounding boom. A scorching red sun appeared in the air, radiating scintillating white light in all directions. As soon as the golden threads in the sword formation came into contact with this white light, they completely shattered and crumbled. Within the span of just a single breath, the sun had swelled countless times in size, encompassing an area with a radius of several thousand feet. Even the two Long family cultivators, as well as Yi Ying and Yi Chu, were affected by this explosion, and all four of them were given a massive fright. Thankfully, they were situated quite far away from the Crimson Sword to begin with, so they had ample time to withdraw their treasures and abilities before fleeing the scene. The power produced by a self-detonating top-grade Divine Spirit treasures was most likely quite fearsome even to a body integration cultivator. If it weren't for Han Li's quick thinking, he would have most definitely perished in that explosion already. At this moment, he was situated several thousand feet away from the white sun, looking on with a set of pale features. Even though he had withdrawn his flying swords during his retreat, a dozen or so of them were withdrawn a little too late, and the power of the explosion had damaged their spiritual nature. He was going to have to nurture them for a period of time in the future to facilitate a full recovery. Thankfully, all of his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords had many types of precious materials, such as refined crystal, infused into them. Otherwise, they would have all been completely destroyed as part of that explosion. Han Li looked on at the scorching sun, with an intense, unblinking gaze, as blue light shimmered within his eyes. The scintillating sun was far too bright for a normal cultivator to stare directly into, but that didn't seem to faze him at all, and he could clearly see everything that was going on within it. All of a sudden, his expression changed slightly as he spread open his wings, disappearing on the spot as an arc of azure and white lightning. In the next instant, Han Li reappeared out of thin air before grabbing the air down below with a palm that was as pristine white as jade. 5 bone rings immediately surfaced on his 5 fingers before disappearing in a flash. Letter 1D627, letter 1D45F, letter 1D452, letter 1D452, letter 1D638, letter 1D626, letter 1D624, letter 1D630, letter 1D4C2. 5 bursts of glacial flames were blasted from his fingertips, creating a sea of 5 colored flames that enshrouded a vast area down below. A crimson shadow that was around a foot in length suddenly appeared. It was a vibrant red blood dragon with an incomplete blood phoenix clamped tightly within its mouth. A small portion of the blood phoenix's body had disappeared, and the remaining portion of its body remained completely motionless in the blood dragon's mouth, as if it had lost all of its spiritual nature. Within the glacial flames, the blood dragon was scurrying around in a surreptitious manner, clearly attempting to flee the scene using the chaotic explosion to cover its tracks. However, never would it have thought that Han Li had an ability like the Brightsight Spirit Eyes. Not only was its location immediately identified, Han Li had even summoned his 5 glacial flames to ensnare it. With its body trapped within the 5 glacial flames, the blood dragon was moving at less than a tenth of its original speed, and all of its movements had become extremely slow and sluggish. A cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes, and the 5 glacial flames immediately swept back toward him, carrying the blood dragon within it. At the same time, Han Li opened his mouth to summon the Heaven Void Cauldron, which was enshrouded in a ball of azure light. "Don't you dare!" The blood dragon immediately let loose a roar of shock and fury as a streak of crimson light shot forth from its body, hurtling directly toward the cauldron. In this desperate situation, Long Dong's soul released its final bit of true spirit blood as a streak of sword chi in a final stand. If this was just a normal attack, then the Crimson Sword Chi would most likely be able to vanquish it. However, the Heaven Void Cauldron itself was also a divine spirit treasure, and the azure threads it unleashed were extremely versatile. Azure light immediately flashed in the air as most of the azure threads disappeared at Han Li's behest. The remaining threads also suddenly transformed into a streak of azure light to combat the oncoming crimson light. In the next instant, spatial fluctuations erupted in the air around a foot above the crimson dragon, and a plume of azure threads shot forth from within space. The azure threads dispersed, instantly ensnaring the blood dragon and the blood phoenix within the 5 colored flames before drawing them toward the Heaven Void Cauldron. All of a sudden, a ball of azure light suddenly emerged from the desperately struggling blood dragon. The ball of light flashed before appearing over 100 feet away, then flashed several times in quick succession to cover a distance of 300 to 400 feet. A cold light flashed through Han Li's eyes as a burst of black light suddenly shot forth from his law-destruction eye. A dull thump rang out in the air, following which the azure ball of light stumbled out of thin air, and it seemed to have dimmed significantly. However, before Han Li had a chance to unleash any other attacks, the azure ball of light abruptly flashed through the air, disappearing into the distance in the blink of an eye. Han Li's brows furrowed as the black light that had just accumulated within his third demonic eye dissipated. The law-destruction eye did indeed possess the ability to puncture space, but he naturally couldn't do anything from such a long distance away. Meanwhile, the blood dragon and the blood phoenix had already been sealed away into his heaven-void cauldron. The lid of the cauldron then came crashing down with a resounding boom. What everyone had failed to notice was that, in that instant, two discrete specks of golden light suddenly emerged from one of Han Li's sleeves before disappearing into the cauldron in an extremely stealthy manner. At this moment, the other four cultivators were situated several thousand feet away from Han Li, and all of them were stunned to see Han Li capturing the true spirit blood while Long Dong fled for his life. The two Long family cultivators glanced at one another before immediately fleeing the scene as two streaks of light. Those ghosts and devils they had summoned also fled in hot pursuit. The direction they were escaping toward was none other than the one that Long Dong had just disappeared in. Yi Chu and Yi Ying displayed no intention to give chase. Instead, both of them flew toward Han Li. Moments later, the two of them appeared just over 100 feet away from Han Li. Yi Chu was looking at Han Li and his weeping soul beast with undisguised shock in her eyes. Meanwhile, Yi Ying wore a smile on her face, but her eyes were fixed on the azure cauldron in front of Han Li. It was quite clear that the two had become extremely wary of Han Li after he had captured the true spirit bloods. Letter 1D4EF, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. Brother Han, thank you for your assistance. If it hadn't been for your efforts, the Long family would have most likely succeeded in their scheme. Rest assured, Brother Han, the conditions I promised you earlier remain unchanged. Your efforts won't be for nothing, Yi Ying said with a seductive smile. Indeed, with the power of our Yi family, there are very few wishes what we won't be able to grant you, Yi Chu also said in a slow voice, but there was a barely disguised threat in her words. Han Li's lips twitched, but he didn't say anything as he patted the azure cauldron before him. A ringing sound erupted as the lid of the cauldron was lifted once again. The blood dragon and the blood phoenix both emerged at the opening of the cauldron, with countless azure threads binding their bodies. Yi Ying and Yi Chu were ecstatic to see the true spirit bloods. A crimson light flashed past Yi Ying's face, and the indistinct projection of a miniature blood phoenix appeared for a split second. Han Li smiled as he flicked a finger toward the azure cauldron. All of the azure threads around the blood phoenix were immediately severed, and it was tossed toward Yi Ying. Yi Ying was ecstatic to see this, and she let loose a delicate cry as the other miniature blood phoenix flew forth from her body, crashing into the oncoming incomplete blood phoenix. Brilliant crimson light flashed, and the two of them combined as one without any impediment, forming a crimson ball that was around a foot in size. The ball was of an extremely vibrant shade of red, as if it had been forged from blood essence. After circling around in the air for a while, it transformed into a blood phoenix that was around a foot in size, flapping its wings as it flew in circles around Yi Ying. Yi Ying wore a smile on her face as she pointed a slim finger at the blood phoenix. Following a crisp heavenly cry, the blood phoenix spread its wings and disappeared into Yi Ying's body as a streak of crimson light. Immediately thereafter, a layer of crimson light surfaced over Yi Ying's body. At the same time, the indistinct projection of a blood phoenix appeared behind her. It was initially rather blurry, but it slowly became clearer and gradually stabilized. After a while, the blood phoenix projection disappeared, and Yi Ying opened her eyes with excitement shining on her face. Most of my true phoenix blood has been recovered. There's still a small portion missing, and it's most likely been forcibly devoured by this true dragon blood, so it won't be easy to separate it. Thankfully, the true dragon blood has also fallen in our hands. Brother Han, toss the true dragon blood over to me as well. Blood of this caliber has to be stored carefully, as using ordinary containers could quite possibly damage its spiritual nature. Yi Ying smiled as she flipped over her hand to produce a small purplish golden gourd that was extremely intricate and beautiful. However, Han Li merely smiled in response, but showed no intention of handing over the true dragon blood. Fairy Yi, if I recall correctly, I seem to have only promised to help you recover your true spirit blood. Now that you've already recovered the heavenly phoenix blood, isn't it too greedy of you to ask for this true dragon blood as well? What are you trying to say, fellow Taoist Han? Could it be that you want to keep this true spirit blood for yourself? Yi Chu's voice immediately cooled as she shot daggers from her eyes. I may be an ascended cultivator, but I know the taboos of the true spirit families. I wouldn't dare to take the true dragon blood for myself. Even if I were to fuse the true spirit blood into my body, I'd end up being hunted by all of the true spirit families. Han Li replied with a smile and a shake of his head. Seeing as Han Li wasn't intending to take the true dragon blood for himself, Yi Ying's expression eased as she asked, "Then what do you propose, Brother Han?" "He, nothing much. This true dragon should be no less valuable than your heavenly phoenix blood. Your Yi family would be intent on getting your hands on it, right? If I were willing to offer up this item, what would you give me in exchange?" Han Li asked. So you're looking for some benefits, Brother Han. That's no problem at all. State your price, Brother Han, Yi Ying replied with a wide smile. An item as precious as true spirit blood can't be exchanged for using mere spirit stones. Having said that, if you have 100 or so top-grade spirit stones, I can certainly consider it, Han Li said in an indifferent voice. Yi Ying's expression changed slightly, and she turned to exchange a glance with Yi Chu. After turning back to Han Li, her smile was a little more forced as she said, "Surely you jest, Brother Han. Even our Yi family won't be able to offer up so many top-grade spirit stones at once. If you're only looking for a few, I can try and source them for you." "If I'm only looking for a few top-grade spirit stones, I wouldn't trouble you too. I'd be able to source them on my own, albeit with a bit of effort," Han Li replied. "So what do you want? Go ahead and spit it out," Yi Chu urged in a cold voice, seemingly having run out of patience. "It's quite simple. I want one of the heavenly phoenix feathers in your possession, Senior Yi," Han Li said in a slow voice. "What heavenly phoenix feather? Have you been swindled by that black phoenix race cultivator?" Yi Chu's pupils contracted slightly upon hearing this, but her expression remained calm. "Do you think I believe that, Senior Yi? If you insist on denial, I wouldn't mind using a soul search technique on fellow Taoist Zio. I only want a single feather. One heavenly phoenix feather in exchange for true dragon blood is a huge bargain for the two of you." Han Li's expression remained calm and collected. Yi Chu's brows furrowed tightly upon hearing this, and she cast her gaze toward Yi Ying. Yi Ying pursed her lips a few times before asking, "What do you need this heavenly phoenix feather for? This item is also very useful to our Yi family, so would you be able to accept anything else instead? How about the 2 Xianxia dragon fruits I obtained earlier? I have a treasure that needs to be refined again, and that process just so happens to require a heavenly phoenix feather. As for Xianxia dragon fruits, those are quite tempting as well, but in comparison, they obviously pale next to a heavenly phoenix feather," Han Li replied calmly. "So you're only after the heavenly phoenix feather, Brother Han. Is there no room for negotiation?" Yi Ying stared at the blood dragon atop the azure cauldron with an indecisive look on her face. If you're in possession of immortal gaze pills or 9-heart spirit Xianxias, I wouldn't mind taking them as well," Han Li chuckled. "HMPH, if I had such things, why would I even need the true dragon blood? I could just take those to ascend to the spatial tempering and body integration stages. All right, you have yourself a deal. I'll exchange for the true dragon blood with a heavenly phoenix feather." Yi Ying gritted her teeth and agreed in the end. Yi Chu's expression changed slightly upon hearing this, and she opened her mouth to say something, but swallowed her words in the end. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up. "Haha, that's a very wise decision, fellow Taoist Yi. If you'd allow me to examine the phoenix feather in order to verify its authenticity first, I'll immediately hand over the true dragon blood. You wouldn't be worried that I'll take the treasure and leave, right?" Han Li said with a smile. Yi Ying sighed and turned to Yi Chu as she instructed, "Big Sister Chu, give him a phoenix feather." "Yes, young mistress." Yi Chu hesitated momentarily, but did as she was told in the end. She swept a hand over her storage bracelet to produce a fiery red jade box. Not only was this jade box of a vibrant crimson color, its surface was engraved with fiery patterns. Upon being produced, it began to emanate a scorching aura, and the surrounding temperatures were instantly raised significantly. Flame jade. Han Li was quite taken aback at the sight of this jade box. "So you also recognize the materials of this jade box, Brother Han. Indeed, this is myriad-year flame jade, which ranks alongside myriad-year profound jade. Only a container constructed from rare extreme fire attribute materials like this can ensure that the phoenix feather doesn't lose any of its spiritual chi, Yi Ying said with a slightly smug smile on her face. Only true spirit families like your Yi family would bear to use such a precious material to construct a container, Han Li chuckled. Yi Chu removed the lid of the box in an expressionless manner to reveal 3 5-colored long feathers, each of which was around 3 feet in length. She pointed a finger at one of the feathers, and it drifted out of the box before hovering over to Han Li. A serious expression appeared on Han Li's face as he made a grabbing motion toward the feather, and it was slowly drawn into his grasp. He then began to stroke it with his finger and carefully examine it. The feather was glittering and translucent, and 5-colored runes were shimmering indistinctly over its surface. The spiritual chi emanating from it was also quite extraordinary. There's no mistaking it. This is indeed a heavenly phoenix feather. Han Li nodded with a content expression as he said. It would most likely be impossible to try and artificially replicate such a brilliant treasure anyway. He flipped over his palm to produce a pristine white jade box that was emanating astonishing glacial chi. It was none other than a jade box constructed from myriad-year profound jade. Yi Chu and Yi Ying couldn't help but exchange a surprised glance upon seeing this box. Han Li placed the heavenly phoenix feather into the box, and white light flashed, following which the jade box disappeared. Seeing as I've received the phoenix feather, the true dragon blood naturally belongs to you too now. Han Li glanced at Yi Chu and Yi Ying with a smile on his face before flicking a finger toward the azure cauldron. Following a crisp clang, the azure threads around the blood dragon unraveled, and it was tossed toward the 2 women. Spiritual light flashed around the blood dragon's body as it began to struggle in midair, looking as if it wanted to run away. However, Yi Ying was prepared for this well in advance, and she immediately lifted the gourd in her hands with an elated expression. A loud buzzing sound immediately rang out, and a swath of blue light abruptly swept forth from the opening of the gourd. The blue light flashed and enveloped the blood dragon's body before dragging it toward her. Yi Chu and Yi Ying immediately began to examine the blood dragon with an intense, unblinking gaze, scanning through its body with their spiritual sense over and over again at the same time. After a long while, Yi Chu exhaled and finally nodded in approval. It really is true dragon blood. A smile also appeared on Yi Ying's face. She made a hand seal, and the blue light forcibly shrank the blood dragon before drawing it into her gourd. Yi Ying stowed away her gourd before turning to Han Li with a sweet smile. You really are a man of your word. Brother Han, would you be interested in becoming a guest of our Yi family when we return to Deep Heaven City? Our Yi family has always treated brilliant cultivators like you with kindness and respect. Deep Heaven City. I have no intention of going back there anytime soon. I'm going to remain in the primordial world for a while, and I won't be going back in the near future, Han Li immediately replied without any hesitation. Han Li's response came as quite a surprise to the 2 women. A wistful expression appeared on Yi Ying's face, but she didn't press the issue any further as she said, in that case, then so be it. However, if you change your mind, you can come to our Yi family at any time, Brother Han. I would be sure to arrange a splendid welcome for you. In the meantime, we should get away from this place. Otherwise, the beings from the wood race may track us down soon. Also, that fellow Taoist from the Black Phoenix race must be quite a headache for you, right, Brother Han? How about you leave her to me? Yi Ying turned to the divine essence-effused mountain with a smile on her face. I'll have to trouble you then. She is indeed a rather troublesome prospect for me, Han Li immediately agreed. Thus, he waved a hand toward the divine essence-effused mountain, and it shrank drastically amid a brilliant flash of gray light. Following a few flashes, it had been reduced to a miniature mountain that was only around 10 feet tall. The miniature mountain then disappeared amid a dull boom, revealing Xiao Hong lying motionlessly in the crater below it. Yi Chu was already prepared well in advance, and as soon as the miniature mountain disappeared, she flicked her 5 fingers down below. 5 streaks of green light came pouring down, and instantly reached the air directly above the Black Phoenix. These streaks of green light then exploded to form a green net that ensnared the phoenix within. Yi Chu then made a hand seal and began to chant something. Spiritual light flashed from the green net, and it immediately began to contract. What was quite remarkable was that the Black Phoenix was also shrinking along with the net, and was reduced down to around half a foot in size in the blink of an eye. Yi Chu ceased her chanting before making a grabbing motion downward, upon which the green net flew up toward her as a ball of green light. Following a few flashes, the ball of green light disappeared up her sleeve. At this moment, Han Li cupped his fist in a salute and said something that came as quite a surprise to the two women. "I have some matters to be taken care of, so this where we part. We haven't passed through the skyline yet, so we're still within Wood Tribe territory. I think it's best that you stick with us, Brother Han," Yi Ying said with a hint of surprise in her eyes. "No, thanks. I really do have something that needs to be taken care of, and it won't be convenient for me to travel with the two of you. I'll be taking my leave now." Han Li shook his head in a decisive manner before stowing away his treasures and the weeping soul beast, then flying away as a streak of azure light. In the blink of an eye, Han Li had disappeared into the distance. Yi Ying and Yi Chu glanced at one another following Han Li's abrupt departure. "He's made a smart decision. Could it be that he's aware that we have more allies outside?" Yi Ying furrowed her brows in a rather gloomy manner. "Perhaps. Even if that's not the case, it's a testament to how cautious he is. He hasn't given us the slightest opportunity to place him in a disadvantageous position. Otherwise, with the allies deployed by the family leader on our side, we have a very good chance of keeping him," Yi Chu replied. "Big Sister Chu, you used a secret technique earlier to transmit your voice to me, urging me not to attack him. You're already a cultivator at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage. Couldn't we have brought him down together? Perhaps there was no need to even offer that heavenly phoenix feather." Yi Ying was still clearly rather forlorn at the fact that they were forced to offer up a heavenly phoenix feather. "If I only had to defeat him, then I'm at least 70% confident in my ability to do so at a very conservative estimate. However, killing him or capturing him alive is an entirely different story. You've witnessed that man's abilities and treasures, young mistress. He was able to capture that black phoenix race cultivator alive in just a few exchanges, and the sword formation he set up at the end is even capable of destroying divine spirit treasures. Furthermore, that spirit beast of his is even more peculiar. Even if I'd been in its place, I wouldn't have been able to bring down that faceless ghost monarch so easily. Furthermore, he was quite relaxed throughout the entire battle, so he must have some other trump cards up his sleeve. If he destroys the true dragon blood in a fit of rage, then that'd be a devastating loss to us. Heavenly phoenix feathers are rare, but we'll have further opportunities to find them. However, true dragon blood can only be found in the Long family among the human race, and we don't know how many more generations would pass before another lineal descendant with a bloodline as pure as Long Dong would appear," Yi Chu explained. After a prolonged silence, Yi Ying sighed in a resigned manner. "I'm aware of this as well. That man's abilities and treasures are indeed quite extraordinary. Seeing as even Big Sister Chu wasn't confident in bringing him down, then I think we made the right decision. In any case, we've obtained the true dragon blood, so surely the family leader won't blame us for anything. The true dragon blood is far too important for us to be taking risks with it. Thankfully, that man was quite smart and didn't force our hand. In any case, let's get out of here. The battle from earlier was quite a fierce one. Who knows if we've attracted the attention of the Wood Tribe already?" Yi Chu nodded and rustled her sleeve to summon that massive wooden bird again. The two women flew into the bird's body as streaks of light, and the bird immediately transformed into a ball of green light that flew away into the distance like a shooting star. Meanwhile, Han Li was already thousands of kilometers away. As he flew through the air, a hint of excitement appeared in his eyes as his lips curled up into a smile. All of a sudden, he opened his mouth to expel the heaven void cauldron again. Han Li carried the miniature cauldron with one hand before gently tapping its lid to open up a small gap. Blue light flashed through his eyes, and two golden shadows emerged from the gap. After circling through the air for a while, they settled on the cauldron's lid and revealed themselves to be a pair of thumb-sized gold-devouring beetles. Han Li smiled as he opened his mouth again to blast forth two balls of pure spiritual qi that enshrouded the pair of spirit insects. Brilliant golden light erupted from the bodies of the gold-devouring beetles, and they swelled to around half a foot in size, giving off a rather menacing appearance. Han Li began to chant something, and the two giant insects suddenly opened their mouths in unison. Crimson light flashed, and two small balls of blood emerged from within their mouths. Han Li's eyes lit up as he made a grabbing motion to draw the balls of blood toward him. When he opened his 5 fingers again, a miniature blood dragon and a miniature blood phoenix, each of which was only several inches in length, had appeared on his palm. Han Li had somehow managed to retain a bit of the true spirit bloods for himself. Yi Ying and Yi Chu had been extremely cautious, but never would they have thought that Han Li would possess mature gold-devouring beetles that were capable of devouring all things. Otherwise, they definitely wouldn't have allowed Han Li to recover the spirit blood. After all, unless special secret techniques or treasures were used, true spirit blood couldn't be split up, so they had become complacent, thinking that there wouldn't be any issues. Han Li looked at the miniature blood dragon and blood phoenix in his palm, both of which were desperately attempting to fly away. An azure light shimmered from his fingers to ensnare them as a contemplative look appeared on his face. Han Li hadn't decided on how he was going to use these two true spirit bloods. However, one thing was for sure. True spirit blood was definitely extremely precious and was most likely equal in value to some legendary immortal pills. Unfortunately, he didn't know much about true spirit families and true spirit bloodlines, so he didn't know what to do for the moment. As such, he could only make a decision after conducting more thorough research on true spirit blood in the future. All of a sudden, Han Li's expression changed as he abruptly flipped a hand over to produce a shimmering silver wooden box. He placed the miniature blood dragon and blood phoenix into the box, then swept his sleeve through the air to plaster several talismans onto the box. Silver light flashed, and the wooden box disappeared. After doing all that, Han Li cast his gaze toward the extremely far distance, and his eyes narrowed reflexively. All of a sudden, an incredulous look on his face. It's that guy. His pursuer's spiritual sense was extremely powerful, so it was definitely too late for him to run. The high zenith invisibility talisman most likely wouldn't help him in this situation, either. However, his pursuer's aura was significantly more feeble than it was before, suggesting that it had suffered severe injuries. Qing Yuanzi was able to combat a body integration cultivator at just the spatial tempering stage using his aureate sword formation. Even though my cultivation base is inferior to Qing Yuanzi's, I should still be able to hold my own against a half-dead opponent like this one. On top of that, I have some other trump cards up my sleeve that I can use should the situation demand it. Han Li's mind was racing rapidly, and he was beginning to regret parting with Yi Chu and Yi Ying. If he was still with them, then he wouldn't have had to face this crisis. However, there was no use in crying over spilled milk, and Han Li quickly refocused his attention on the situation at hand. After making a decision, he immediately flew downward as a streak of azure light. Following a few flashes, he appeared on the summit of a small mountain. He then rustled his sleeve to produce his 72 golden flying swords, all of which multiplied into several hundred streaks of sword chi at his behest, then disappeared into the surrounding area. He had set up his aureate sword formation again. After that, Han Li laid a hand on the back of his head, and a swath of gray light rose up into the air, then dispersed to form a gray light barrier that enshrouded his body within. At the same time, he rustled his other sleeve to produce 5 white skulls. All 5 skulls opened their mouths in unison to blast forth the 5 glacial flames, which combined with the gray light. As he stood within the gray light, Han Li made a hand seal, and the flames gradually expanded, forming a thick 5-colored halo that rotated around his body. Almost at the exact same moment, a thunderclap erupted behind Han Li as a pair of azure and white wings surfaced on his back. After doing all that, Han Li clasped his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky in the distance with a grim expression on his face. Moments later, spiritual light flashed in the distance, and a ball of silver light came hurtling toward him. Following a few flashes, it appeared in the sky above the mountain that Han Li was situated on. The silver light receded to reveal a green humanoid figure wearing a faint silver belt. It was none other than the low silver tier high-grade wood spirit that had appeared in the Blackleaf Forest. Han Li's pupils contracted as he instantly began appraising his assailant. From its external appearance, this silver tier wood spirit appeared to have remained completely unchanged compared to when it was in the Blackleaf Forest. However, the spiritual pressure emanating from its body had been more than halved, which suggested that it really was carrying severe injuries. Han Li heaved an internal sigh of relief upon making these observations. If he had been mistaken, and his assailant was completely unscathed, then he would have immediately fled the scene. However, when he thought about it, it wasn't a surprise that this silver tier wood spirit had been wounded. The heavenly phoenix body that Yi Ying was able to summon through stimulation of her true spirit blood was truly fearsome, far more powerful than this high-grade wood spirit. It was tracking the 2 women earlier, so they must have battled one another, thereby resulting in its current condition. However, what came as quite a surprise to Han Li was that this wood spirit was so persistent despite the injuries it had suffered. It had given up on pursuing Yi Ying and Yi Chu, choosing to go after Han Li instead, most likely because it was too scared to go after them again following their previous battle. However, it couldn't return to the Wood tribe empty-handed, so it had to at least capture Han Li. Having analyzed the situation, Han Li was feeling rather gloomy. The silver tear Wood spirit cast its gaze toward Han Li, before abruptly throwing a fist at him from afar without so much as a single word. The sharp screeching sound of a space being torn apart immediately erupted. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li felt a burst of tremendous force strike the protective barrier he'd set up around him. The five-colored halo tremored as the gray light barrier twisted and warped, while Han Li was forced to stumble back several steps. Azure light flashed over his face several times in quick succession before he finally managed to barely arrest his momentum. Han Li's expression changed slightly following that attack. That strike was packing at least several tens of tons of force. Thankfully, he possessed a body far more powerful than that of normal cultivators of the same cultivation. Otherwise, even a spatial tempering cultivator would have found that attack quite difficult to withstand. It appeared that silver tier Wood spirits were even more fearsome than the legend suggested. The Wood spirit was quite surprised to see Han Li handling that attack so easily. Seemingly having realized that Han Li wasn't as weak and frail as it had imagined, it harumphed coldly before striding forward expressionlessly. Letter 1D4 BB, letter 1D4 C7, letter 1D4 52, letter 1D6 26, letter 1D6 38, letter 1D4 52. Letter 1D4 B8, letter 2134, letter 1D6 2E. Brilliant silver light erupted from its body as it appeared just over 100 feet away from Han Li in a flash. At the same time, a suit of green wooden armor abruptly appeared over its body. The surface of the armor was shimmering with silver light and riddled with countless sharp spikes that differed in length. The ordinary-looking Wood spirit suddenly appeared a lot more sinister and menacing. Han Li's pupils contracted as he flapped his wings, upon which he disappeared on the spot as an arc of azure and white lightning. In the next instant, he appeared over 300 feet away, having already made a hand seal and begun chanting something. The Wood spirit immediately strode forward again without any hesitation, rushing directly toward Han Li. However, the Wood spirit had only traveled just over 100 feet, when 7 or 8 shimmering golden threads appeared before it without any premonition. The Wood spirit's heart jolted with surprise as azure light shimmering from its fingers, and it immediately grabbed toward the golden threads. The azure light and golden threads came into contact with one another amid a series of dull thumps, and spiritual light intertwined as the two opposing forces came to an impasse. A hint of surprise flashed through the Wood spirit's eyes as it spread open the fingers on its hand, summoning the same azure light to try and join in on the attack. However, right at this moment, golden light flashed in rapid succession in the nearby area as a series of golden threads emerged out of thin air. All of them had appeared very close to the Wood spirit, and they converged toward it, as if they were trying to slice his body into pieces. These golden threads were traveling extremely quickly, and the Wood spirit was yet to ascertain their power, so it naturally wasn't willing to take any reckless risks. As such, it twisted around, and an identical green silhouette appeared around 70 to 80 feet behind it. The golden threads flashed through the air, slicing the Wood spirit into countless segments, but they had merely struck an afterimage. At this moment, more and more of these golden threads began to appear around the Wood spirit. All of them were shimmering with frosty light as they slowly converged toward it. "This is a sword formation," the Wood spirit exclaimed. It immediately brought its hands together, and a ball of piercing silver light appeared between its palms. After separating its hands, a loud explosion erupted as countless streaks of silver light shot forth in all directions, striking the oncoming golden threads. The golden threads and silver light clashed amid a string of resounding booms, creating a vibrant display of golden and silver radiance. These streaks of silver light appeared to be even more powerful than the sword formation, as they were able to shatter the oncoming golden threads. The Wood spirit's body swayed, and it shot forth as a green shadow, attempting to take this opportunity to escape from the sword formation. In the next instant, it appeared around 500 to 600 feet away. It was on the brink of escaping from the sword formation. However, right at this moment, a loud thunderclap erupted up ahead as Han Li appeared out of thin air with azure and white arcs of lightning revolving around his body. He then immediately lashed out with a pair of fists, one of which was white while the other was black, creating a devastating dual attack. The Wood spirit didn't have time to think as it continued to race ahead. In response to Han Li's attack, it swiped its arms through the air to send countless claw projections hurtling toward his fists. Following two loud rumbling booms, the fists and claw projections collided amid a deafening commotion. Han Li was immediately sent flying, while the wood spirit was also forced to stumble backward. When the wood spirit finally arrested its momentum and attempted to charge out of the sword formation again, the vanquished golden threads had appeared again and were converging toward it. As such, it could only return to its original spot, as a dark expression appeared on its face. This silver tear wood spirit was already being struck, with the feeling that it was perhaps a mistake to try and hunt down this human cultivator. During the upcoming period of time, the wood spirit unleashed a few more powerful abilities, but every time it was about to escape from the sword formation, it would be forced back by Han Li's fists or his treasures. Furthermore, the golden threads that were destroyed only took a short time to recover before sweeping toward it again. With Han Li's current immense power in conjunction with his extremely robust body, even the wood spirit was unable to forcibly steamroll over him and escape from the sword formation. Of course, this was only because the wood spirit was severely wounded and could only muster up around half of its full power. Otherwise, Han Li wouldn't be able to stand in its path at all. However, as things currently were, Han Li really was able to trap a silver tear wood spirit through the use of his aureate sword formation. At this moment, the countless sword threads within the sword formation were converging once again. The wood spirit's eyes flashed, and it could sense that it was in some peril. All of a sudden, it stopped what it was doing and stood motionlessly within the sword formation. However, silver light was surging erratically over its suit of wooden armor, and all of the spikes on the armor began to tremor gently while emitting a dull ringing sound. Han Li's heart jolted with shock upon seeing this, and brilliant azure light erupted from his body as he poured forth even more power into the sword formation. Right at this moment, the wood spirit suddenly threw its head back and let loose a long cry. The suit of armor it was wearing shuddered before the silver spikes shot forth in all directions like countless arrows. Silver light flashed, and there seemed to be no end to these sharp silver spikes. Loud booms rang out incessantly, as golden and silver light clashed over and over again. Han Li drew a sharp breath upon seeing this. However, that wasn't the end. As the wood spirit unleashed a relentless barrage of silver spikes, its body also swelled drastically. The projection of an ancient tree that was around 100 feet tall appeared behind the wood spirit, and its branches and leaves were still rapidly elongating, spreading toward all directions in a frenzy. The ancient tree projection was entirely green in color, and it remained completely unscathed in the face of the attacks from the sword threads. The aureate sword formation was already in tatters from the relentless assault of silver spikes, and after being swept aside with reckless abandon by the rapidly expanding tree projection, the golden threads were finally no longer able to come together. The sword formation had been broken. Han Li's heart sank, but before he had a chance to unleash any further attacks, the silver tear wood spirit harumphed coldly. "Your sword formation is indeed rather peculiar, but I've now released my soul link spirit tree. In my current state with spirit and tree combined as one, your fate of death is sealed." The wood spirit made a hand seal, and brilliant green light erupted from its body as it transformed into a projection, disappearing into the ancient tree projection behind it in a flash, seemingly having fused itself with the tree. Incredible scene then ensued. The ancient tree projection suddenly began to emanate a burst of astonishing spiritual pressure, following which it transformed into a green giant that was around 100 feet tall. Not only did the giant have a tree canopy above its head, its four limbs were also quite lush and green, making it appear as if it were a humanoid tree. On the trunk of the tree was a giant face that was identical to that of the wood spirit. This was the true form of beings from the wood tribe, the wood spirit body. At this moment, the torrent of silver spikes had ceased, and the green giant was the only thing remaining in the sword formation. Han Li was a little flabbergasted as he looked on, but he still immediately activated the sword formation again to summon the golden threads that had disappeared. As soon as those golden threads emerged, they swept toward the giant once again. However, the green giant merely stood on the spot and appraised Han Li with a hint of mockery in its eyes. The sharp screech of metal grating on metal rang out amid flashes of golden and green light. All of the golden threads were repelled, while the green giant remained completely unscathed. "He, a mere deity transformation cultivator like you is trying to harm my soul link spirit tree. What a joke! I'll have to hibernate for 100 years after using my wood spirit body, but even the so-called divine spirit treasures of your human race won't be able to harm me in my current state. You should just give up and resign yourself to death." The giant chuckled coldly before striding forward, completely shrugging off the golden threads around it as it covered a distance of 70 to 80 feet. One more step would almost take it right to where Han Li was standing. Han Li's lips twitched as he withdrew the five-colored halo around his body. In the next instant, the halo appeared around the giant's waist amid a resounding boom. The oncoming giant's speed suddenly faltered significantly, as it was reduced to less than a tenth of its original speed. Han Li was elated to see this, and he hurriedly pointed a finger toward the green giant. A silver fire raven abruptly emerged from the ground, opening its mouth to blast forth several balls of silver flames as it rose up into the air. It then spread its wings, and scorching silver flames erupted all over its body as it also pounced toward the giant. A few rumbling thunderclaps rang out as several silver balls of lightning surfaced beneath the giant's feet. Immediately thereafter, balls of silver flames exploded, completely inundating the giant, creating a thunderous commotion in the process. In the distance, a set of golden and silver robes appeared over Han Li's body as he flew over into the air directly above the giant. The robe spread open at Han Li's behest before swelling to several times its original size. Following an earth-shattering thunderclap, golden and silver fist-sized balls of lightning came raining down in a torrential downpour, crashing down toward the spot where the green giant was situated. The ground below was transformed into a sea of a golden and silver lightning that was interspersed with scorching silver flames. However, Han Li had no intention of ending things there. He let loose a loud cry, and the entire Oriate sword formation completely vanished. Several hundred streaks of golden sword chi immediately surfaced in the surrounding area before converging toward the center at Han Li's behest. All of them disappeared into the lightning and silver flames, creating an even louder string of explosions. Only then did Han Li retreat back to over 100 feet away, where he surveyed the situation from afar. He was sure that even if a cultivator at the pinnacle of the spatial tempering stage were to be struck by his lightning robe, lightning beads, spirit-engulfing heavenly flames, and flying swords at once, they definitely wouldn't be able to emerge unscathed. As for body integration cultivators, only the heavens knew if the combination of those attacks would have any effect. Following the span of a few breaths, the lightning finally began to dissipate. The giant's body was revealed once again, and it appeared that it hadn't moved so much as a single inch from its original spot. Han Li's heart immediately sank as he assessed the giant's condition. The giant's body was shimmering and glittering, as if it had been carved from a block of translucent green jade. What was even more incredible was that it was entirely smooth and unscathed. Such a fearsome barrage of attacks hadn't even hurt it in the slightest. Meanwhile, the giant's massive hands were locked around the five-colored halo around its waist, and it clenched its 10 fingers tightly to crush the halo with its immense power. After doing so, the giant threw its head back and chortled heartily before abruptly stomping a foot into the ground in a violent motion. A green halo of spiritual light immediately proliferated through the air, sweeping through the scorching silver flames. Amid the flash of green light, the silver fire raven was forced to reveal itself, and was ensnared by this mysterious spiritual light. The spirit engulfing heavenly flames was capable of devouring all types of spiritual powers, but it was completely powerless in the face of this green light. As for the 72 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords in the air, the green giant paid them no heed at all, allowing them to strike its body, upon which they would be immediately repelled by flashes of green light. There were even a dozen or so flying swords among them that began to dim significantly after striking the giant's body a few times, and they began to emit cries of anguish. These were none other than the flying swords that had been most heavily affected by the detonation of the blood crystal Mo sword. These flying swords were damaged by the explosion to begin with, and only barely managed to contribute to setting up the Oriate sword formation. After being repelled by the green giant's body several times, they were completely spent. Han Li's expression changed drastically as he waved a hand to summon all of the flying swords back to him. The sword flew back rapidly, quickly shrinking in the process before disappearing up his sleeve. I now possess an indestructible body. Even beings with a slightly superior cultivation base won't be able to harm me. If you can hurt me in my current state, I could consider letting you go. the giant chortled in a deafening voice as it crossed its arms with an expression of extreme arrogance on its face. After transforming into this giant form, this silver tear wood spirit was far more powerful than before, and its body had also become vastly more robust. None of Han Li's attacks had any effect on it, and that was quite concerning for him. Only then did he realize that he had underestimated the massive gulf between a silver tear wood spirit and a spatial tempering cultivator. Having cultivated the Provenance true devil arts and the 100 meridian refinement mantra, he was naturally aware that his powers went far beyond the realm of his cultivation base. However, he had never established a clear gauge on his exact power level. Deity transformation cultivators were definitely no match for him, and he hadn't encountered any opportunities to test his powers against spatial tempering cultivators. After witnessing the spatial tempering stage Yi Chu and the two Long family cultivators in battle, he was under the impression that he was comparable to them in power if he were to unleash all of his abilities. In the case of the Long family cultivators, whose devils and ghosts were vulnerable to his divine Devilbane lightning, there was even a good chance that he would be able to defeat them. If he had known this earlier, he would have fought the Crimson Shadow he had encountered in the Shadow Tribe without resorting to using his gold-devouring beetles. On this occasion, he knew that he would be unable to escape the detection of the Silver Tear Wood Spirit's powerful spiritual sense, so he could only take the initiative by setting up the Aureate Sword formation in advance to fight for his life. Otherwise, facing such a powerful being in direct combat would be nothing short of suicidal. However, never would he have thought that even a severely wounded Silver Tear Wood Spirit could be this powerful. None of his secret techniques or treasures could harm it, and its speed and power had also undergone drastic improvements. This ability of the Wood Spirit was insane. In this situation, there was only one more strategy that he could try. If that didn't work, then he would have to resort to fleeing using his Bloodshadow evasion technique in the hope that he could encounter something that would save him during his escape. In any case, he definitely wasn't going to give up and offer his head on a silver platter. With these thoughts racing through Han Li's mind, the indecision in his eyes disappeared and was replaced by renewed determination. Without uttering a single word, he suddenly flapped his thunderstorm wings, and after several flashes, arcs of azure and white lightning began to revolve around his wings, forming a series of fist-sized azure and white balls of lightning. These balls of lightning were crackling loudly as Han Li made a hand seal with a grim expression on his face. Azure light flashed on either side of his body, and 4 identical azure figures appeared, all of which had wings on their backs. Interesting, the green giant chuckled nonchalantly upon seeing this. The 5 azure figures wore grave expressions as they shot forth through the air, transforming into white threads in the process before disappearing in a flash. The green giant chortled as it abruptly swung a massive hand toward a certain spot that was several tens of feet away. A loud boom erupted as the space there was shattered and warped. A dozen or so white threads immediately emerged from the spatial cracks before stumbling out as a series of azure figures. The giant made a grabbing motion with its massive hand, and a burst of immense invisible power swept past, crushing all of these azure figures into nothingness. It was clear that the figures were a result of Han Li's abilities. Following that, black light flashed from the top of the giant's head. Another azure figure flickered into space and silently swept down. However, the giant already anticipated this, and he raised his head, releasing an emerald green beam of light from his head. The beam of light was as thick as a barrel and incredibly fast. As a result, the azure figure was unable to dodge and took the blow directly. A miserable scream sounded, followed by the fall of the azure figure. The giant sneered. But then, purple light shined from behind the figure, radiating brightly. Another silhouette inconceivable appeared. It waved its sleeve and released hundreds of golden specks of light. The newly appeared silhouette was Han Li. At such a close distance, even the giant immediately sensed the azure figure, but he was too late to stop it. He only heard the sharp patter of rain as the golden specks all struck the back of the giant. Enraged, the giant roared and a large green hand warped, arriving above Han Li's head. It overbearingly swept down. Han Li didn't panic. He unfolded his wings, wanting to flicker into a void. But then the giant flicked 2 of his fingers with a cold snort. Their fingernails shot off in a tremble and disappeared in a blur. A moment later, 2 green streaks pierced through Han Li's wings at inconceivable speed. The sounds of thunder suddenly stopped. In great alarm, Han Li thought of another way to dodge, but it was too late. The giant's hand radiated with green light, and Han Li felt his surroundings grow tense as if it had turned to steel. Even with the immense power of his body, Han Li's movement slowed, and he found it difficult to escape. In that delay, the giant green hand firmly grabbed him. The green giant's strength was absolutely no weaker than Han Li's. The giant sinisterly smiled at seeing his strike land true and revealed a violent expression. Green light surged through his hand as he exerted strength in his hand, intending on crushing Han Li alive. Han Li's face largely changed, and he suddenly muttered an incantation. Azure light continued to surge through his body, glaring from the giant's hand. Then, his body seemed to become crushed as it turned into specks of light. The spirit light condensed in a nearby space, creating an azure talisman. Suddenly, it swept off into the distance. The giant looked at the display with surprise. 100 meters away, space fluctuated, followed by the flicker of Han Li's appearance. Although he was somewhat pale, he quickly collected himself and summoned the azure talisman into his hand. As he found himself in a moment of peril, he used the spirit form talisman's ability to substitute himself, thus allowing him to escape calamity and displace himself a distance away. After tempering the talisman for so many years, the spirit form talisman's abilities were far greater than before. At that moment, the giant spat out a beam of light at the silhouette, suddenly blurring as he approached the haggard Han Li. However, despite Han Li's ruined clothing and pale complexion, he turned to look at the giant with a sinister smile. Astonishingly, this was a different Han Li. The giant blinked and couldn't help but show his bewilderment. The Han Li before him immediately lit up with black light and suddenly shrunk into a black-haired monkey that was only a half-foot tall. It was the Weeping Soul Beast. When Han Li launched his previous attack, he secretly released the Weeping Soul Beast and had it take his form. The Silver Tearwood Spirit had been too distracted to notice. With the protection of his illusions and the Weeping Soul Beast, he activated the High Zenith Invisibility Talisman and was able to quietly escape. Otherwise, with the Wood Spirit's immense spiritual sense, Han Li truly wouldn't have been able to fool the giant at such a close distance. The green giant faintly sensed that something was amiss and recalled the golden specks that Han Li released from his sleeve. Then, his expression sank as he swiped at his back. As one that was both person and tree, the wood spirit's body was extremely hardy, but his body senses was dull. Originally, he didn't believe that Han Li had a true method of harming him. But after he swiped his hand behind him, his eyes lit up as he discovered several inch-large golden beetles laying in his palm. "What is this?" The huge giant was startled, and soon he clenched his hand, but he unfolded it to discover the beetles were safe. His face drastically changed. When Han Li saw this from a distance, a fierce expression appeared on his face, and he gave the beetles a command with his spiritual sense. Suddenly, the giant's back flared with golden light as half-foot-long golden beetles began to strangely appear. They crawled over half of the giant's body and began wildly devouring it. Han Li watched with an emotionless expression, but his heart stirred. Although the gold-devouring beetles were said to have nothing they couldn't eat, that was only a record in the mortal realm. It was also recorded that wood and jade treasures could restrain them. The wood spirit tribe's half-human, half-tree fusion was truly bizarre. Although their bodies resembled huge trees, he wasn't able to determine if they could be considered wood-type treasures. As the experiment went on, the giant soon let out a scream of agony. He slapped at his back with all his might, but the beetles continued to fiercely consume him. His near-indestructible crystalline body was now being easily torn apart by the beetles. With several hundred of these beetles gnawing away at the giant sensed the agony of being torn apart despite his dulled senses. Han Li was overjoyed. After he waved his sleeve to collect the Weeping Soul Beast, his body lit up with azure light and he tore through the sky as an azure streak. Although the gold-devouring beetles were enough to deal with the giant, he couldn't deal with any of the giant's full-powered attacks. It'd be best if he put distance between them. Gold-devouring beetles, fully matured gold-devouring beetles, you actually possess such demonic insects. The giant's scream sounded as if it was having a most fearsome nightmare. Soon after, the sounds of repeated explosions sounded, and green lights instantly filled most of the sky. Han Li didn't turn around and continued his escape with all his speed. In the blink of an eye, he was over the horizon. After several more flickers, he was long gone. A short moment later, a huge ball of light raised to the sky where the giant originally stood. It flew off past the sky in defeat. The faint silhouette of the badly damaged giant could be seen within. There was a cloud of golden insects closely pursuing it. With one trailing after another, they flew off a different direction from Han Li. Not long after, the golden beetle cloud buzzed as they circled and flew back. Not only did they return to their inch-large size, but beetles flew in unorganized disarray. Fortunately, the gold-devouring beetles weren't slow. They streaked past the air like bolts of lightning. 500 kilometers away in an area with scattered rocks, Han Li sat cross-legged with a pale complexion. He was doing his utmost to command the beetles back to him. He already consumed a truly significant portion of his spiritual sense. When the beetles finally returned to him, he eventually lost control of his body as it trembled and fell. At that same time, he put his hands behind his head and let out a painful groan. A quarter-hour later, he was able to collect himself and sit back up. Using the beetles had been extremely dangerous, resulting in nearly all his spiritual sense being wasted. But even so, his spiritual sense only suffered minor damage. It seemed he wouldn't be able to use the beetles for pursuit to prevent excessive drain. Nevertheless, if he hadn't pursued the wood spirit with the gold-devouring beetles, the wood spirit would have discovered something amiss and wouldn't have given up so easily. Now, the silver tear wood spirit suffered much damage from the gold-devouring beetles. Even if he was braver, he wouldn't dare to continue tangling with Han Li. Han Li stroked the spirit beast ring underneath his sleeves and let out a long breath. In a secret forest myriad kilometers away, the silver tear wood spirit Mu Rui was sitting underneath a huge tree in his giant form. One of his arms and nearly half of his body had disappeared, but countless green specks of light flew out from the forest and wildly rushed into his body. The giant's missing body parts regrew at a visible speed. In the time it took to finish a cup of tea, the specks of light ceased and the giant's body was completely restored. But when he opened his eyes, they now appeared exceptionally dim. He held his hands in an incantation gesture, and the giant's body spat out a hollow phantom. It then blurred and condensed into a pale green-skinned wood spirit. The giant then flashed with light and scattered away, turning into a huge tree. After the wood spirit returned to its original form, he glanced in the direction where he fought with Han Li. How very troublesome. This person possesses hundreds of gold-devouring beetles. If I were in peak condition, I could take the risk of killing him and have the beetles lose control. But after receiving 2 heavy injuries in succession, I suffered too much damage to my spirit tree. If I encounter those beetles again, I might truly die. It appears that I have no choice but to give up pursuit. After his expression wavered while in thought, he eventually shook his head and came to a decision. He turned into a ball of silver light and soared back in the direction of Black Leaves Forest. Not long after, Han Li restored a portion of his spiritual sense in another area. Not daring to stay in the area any longer, he suppressed his migraine and tore through the sky in an azure streak. He was heading in the direction of the southern skyline. 2 months later, Han Li arrived above a barren plateau. Soon after, he sought out a small, earthy mountain in a remote place and burrowed into it with a yellow flash. In the heart of the mountain, he easily dug out a hidden room 30 meters wide and put it into order. Then, he drank several medicine pills and sat down cross-legged. A month later, Han Li opened his eyes, revealing their recovered spirit. His spirit, mind, and body made a full recovery. Han Li didn't immediately stand up. Rather, he started to mutter to himself inside the hidden room. Not long after, he shook his sleeve and summoned an azure ring in his palm. It was the storage bracelet of the Black Phoenix clan's Xiao Hong. Although he suppressed her with the divine essence-effused mountain and spared her life, her storage bracelet was another story. It could be considered the price for sparing her life. As a demon cultivator and direct descendant of her clan, Han Li was very interested in what lay inside the storage bracelet. With a brief look at the bracelet with his spiritual sense, his face lit up in joy. It possessed many rare treasures. First off, demon beast materials occupied nearly half of the storage bracelet, with most of them rarely seen on the market. As a member of one of the 7 great demon clans, she should have a far easier time gathering materials compared to humans. He was also overjoyed to find 8 various-colored top-grade spirit stones shining in the corner. Although this was the spirit realm, top-grade spirit stones weren't nearly as precious as one might imagine in the mortal realm. However, they weren't easily acquired either. Top-grade spirit stones were held in small number by high-grade cultivators, but never in large numbers. In particular, One of the white spirit stones was a rarely seen wind attribute spirit stone, much to Han Li's delight. Ever since he entered Deep Heaven City, he always wanted to acquire one. In addition to this, there were also magic tools and various ancient treasures that didn't catch Han Li's eyes. These items couldn't compare to his divine essence-effused mountain and his heaven-void cauldron. Perhaps Xiao Hong didn't care much for these treasures also, otherwise she would have taken them out in battle. Additionally, there was a small collection of medicine bottles in the bracelet that piqued his interest. When he took them out in his hand, he began to identify them. Most of them were healing medicines, with a few of them being cultivation advancement medicine and rare pill refinement materials. One of the wooden boxes even contained a zoysia dragon fruit. Han Li bluntly took that out and put it safely away. Then he came across an odd silver bottle that was engraved with a black fire phoenix. Sparkling golden restriction talisman was sealing it. When Han Li saw this, his mind trembled. He tore the talisman off and opened its lid. Several pops later, 3 thumb-sized black medicine pills flew out from it and circled once in the air. They promptly turned into 3 nimble black flame phoenixes and flew off in different directions. "Yeah!" Han Li yelped in surprise. Nevertheless, he reacted immediately. A gray mist of light flew out and swept up the 3 phoenixes. In the gray light, the phoenixes slowly revolved in the air. Light flashed and turned into 3 jet-black medicine pills. The gray mist folded and withdrew, dropping the 3 phoenixes into Han Li's palm back in the form of medicine pills. Han Li picked up one of the pills with 2 fingers and brought it close to his eye. As medicine pills that can transform and fly, they were definitely valuable. As Han Li's expression turned grave, his mind was filled with various legends regarding medicine pills. Black flame pills. From the pills' provoking appearance, Han Li's eyes flickered and he immediately recognized them. His face lit up in ecstasy. In the entire world, only the Black Phoenix clan can refine these pills by using their personal flames. Even pill refinement masters aren't able to duplicate them. Refining these pills requires them to absorb the life flames of a Black Phoenix in addition to other mysterious materials. That is to say, even the Black Phoenix clan can't produce many of them. A clan member must be at deity transformation stage or above, and even then, they can only refine a single pill every 1,000 years. With high-grade Black Phoenix cultivators rarely seen, the Black Flame pills are as previous as one might imagine. The pills are prized among humans and demons. The most important reason is that they are an optimal supplementary medicine pill for breaking the bottleneck to the spatial tempering stage. Now that he had 3 of these pills, his odds of breaking through to spatial tempering increased by 20%. This left Han Li overjoyed. After some more careful examination and verifying the identity of the Black Flame pills, Han Li suppressed his excitement, returned the medicine pills to the bottle, and sealed it with talisman before carefully putting it away. The most important point of breaking through to spatial tempering was unifying the 5 elements in his body into one. After cultivating the divine essence-effused light, he didn't need to put much more consideration into that. And with the 3 Black Flame pills, he could search for more medicine and secret techniques to increase his odds of breaking through. His hopes of breaking through now greatly increased. But now, his main goal would be to quickly cultivate to late deity transformation stage. By using a large number of medicine pills, it'd only be a matter of time before he broke through the bottleneck of the mid-deity transformation stage. What was most troublesome would be that his original medicine pills would lose efficacy after he entered late deity transformation stage. He would need higher-grade pills in order to further progress. While there were medicine pills effective for late-stage cultivators, they weren't large in number. The most famous of them was the True Toad liquid. In fact, the reason why he risked taking this mission was largely related to the spirit toad it required. After some thought, Han Li suddenly recalled the mysterious guest that knocked on his door before he left Deep Heaven City and narrowed his eyes. If it truly went as smoothly as that person proposed, he could obtain much True Toad liquid. Although he couldn't use the green liquid to produce the medicine limitlessly, it would be enough for him to cultivate for some time. Having carefully remembered the promises of his visitors, Han Li felt there were no other problems and let out a long sigh before tossing the matter to the back of his mind. With a single hand, he swept his hand past the storage bracelet and took another extremely important gain. It was a sparkling rainbow feather. It was the rainbow phoenix feather acquired by the 2 women of the Yi clan. Han Li lightly stroked the feather, and the air shined with rainbow light, nearly submerging the entire room with it. Han Li's heart stirred. It was worthy of its reputation as the life feather of a true spirit-grade heavenly phoenix. With only the feather, it released an aura above any mystical bird found in the mortal realm. Han Li stared at the feather, and his vision flickered. He suddenly opened his mouth and spat out azure-white lightning. A soft roll of thunder sounded. Sparks of light shifted several times, condensing into a pair of azure-white wings that were several inches large. Han Li waved his hand at them, and the miniature thunderstorm wings landed in his hand. He swept his gaze past it and frowned. There were a pair of slender holes in each of the wings. They were from when the giant wood spirit used its fingernails to pierce through the wings. Han Li's frown then faded away. He further examined the thunderstorm wings once through, and concluded the damage would be easily fixed. According to what the soaring sky beast's incarnation said, the so-called thunderstorm wings were originally formed from cunning feathers and couldn't truly become a spirit treasure, because he couldn't activate the wind attribute worldly laws contained in the cunning feather. It also required a wind attribute top-grade spirit stone. That was the reason why he was originally looking for a top-grade wind-attributed spirit stone. Now that he obtained a heavenly phoenix feather, a true spirit material, his original plans had changed. He could add the feather into the thunderstorm wings. The heavenly phoenix feather was different from the cunning feather. The heavenly laws it contained were awe-inspiring spatial abilities. If the feather's laws could be refined in the thunderstorm wings, its power would be as one imagined. The next time he came across a fearsome existence like the silver tear wood spirit, he would have no need to receive its attacks and could easily escape. Han Li fiddled with the wings and feather as he pondered. Fortunately, he already had the experience of refining the cunning feather into the thunderstorm wings. Otherwise, he truly wouldn't have known what to do. Having come to that conclusion, Han Li took out 6 top-grade spirit stones from his storage bracelet. 5 of them represented each of the 5 elements, and he added a 6th, the wind-attributed spirit stone. With his current abilities, he no longer needed earthfare or the like. He opened his mouth and spat out a ball of silver flame. It roiled and gathered into a huge furnace roiling with silver flames. He tossed the thunderstorm wings into the furnace and pointed at the wind-attributed spirit stone. Winds rustled as the spirit stone, and winds disappeared into the furnace. Han Li swept his sleeve at the ground, released an azure mist, producing a large pile of materials in bottles. They were the supplementary materials needed to refine the wings. Luckily, the matter of refining the wings had always been on his mind, so he gathered the needed ingredients over time. Han Li tossed a bottle of quicksilver-like liquid into the furnace and began to mutter as he struck the furnace with a chain of different spell seals. After 10 entire days passed, the room was filled with Han Li's hearty laughter. He stood at the heart of the room and held a pair of see-through crystalline wings. The wings shimmered with azure light and a rainbow mist covered it, but it was also clear as water. They could hardly be seen in Han Li's grasp as if they were an illusion. Han Li already tested its might, and it had truly advanced to the level of a spirit treasure. It was marvelous far beyond what he imagined. This came as no surprise. Whether it be the cunning feather or the heavenly phoenix feather, so long as he could activate its abilities after refinement, refining it into a divine spirit treasure was no problem. Having transformed a treasure twice, Han Li created something with power that greatly satisfied him. Han Li flung the translucent wings into the air, and he spat out a cloud of azure mist before absorbing both into his stomach. Following that, Han Li took out the damaged bamboo cloudswarm swords and began to temper them and slowly restore their spirituality. A year later, above a nameless mountain range in the wilderness, a faint azure light streaked across the sky. The light contained an insipid youth with his arms held behind his back. He was Han Li, who already departed from the hidden room several months before. When he mended his flying sword entirely, he departed from the heart of the mountain and immediately took the sky. Because he was alone, Han Li was extremely careful and thus spent half a year of flight in peace. As for the nameless mountain range he was flying above, it appeared unordinary. Regardless of their altitude, the trees appeared short as shrubbery. If he were to fly closer to the ground, he would also encounter a dense wave of moisture. The mountain range also had depressions that were filled with various-sized lakes. Among them, the largest spanned to thousands of kilometers in width, while the smallest was only half a kilometer wide. Nevertheless, Han Li didn't dare to be careless as he flew past them. Foreign beings, or all sorts of formidable ancient beasts, could be lying in wait inside the water. Ever since he entered the mountains, he had already killed a dozen strange beasts that took the initiative to attack him. Among them included a huge eel from one of the lakes. It was nearly at deity transformation stage and had ferocious water-attributed abilities. It was rather exhausting to deal with. Half a month later, the mountain features began to change, and he came across two perfectly straight mountains that were 3 kilometers tall. When Han Li caught sight of the mountains, Han Li's eyes lit up with joy. With regard to their size, they weren't particularly odd, but one of them was silver-white. Most of the mountain was covered in exceptionally cold crystalline snow. The other mountain was sparkling purple and had maple-like trees growing all over it. The leaves on these trees shined with an odd purple light. The mountains were separated by over 5 kilometers, but apart from the silver snow and the purple trees, the mountains appeared almost entirely the same. Since the two mountains are here, it seems they were telling the truth, Han Li muttered. Soon, his light flashed and he made his way to the mountain of snow. When he drew close, he encountered raging winds that carried an incisive, bone-chilling cold. His expression stirred, but a layer of azure light appeared from his body, and he continued forward unhindered. But before he entered the mountain, 2 streaks of light shot out from the area covered most densely in snow. With several flashes, they arrived 100 meters away from Han Li. Han Li then dismissed his flight light and revealed his body. So it was fellow Taoist Han. I knew that with your abilities, you'd make it out of a trifling mission just fine. The lights in front of Han Li vanished to reveal 2 men. One of them recognized Han Li and spoke with a smile. The person's complexion was pale, and he appeared to be 60 years of age. When Han Li first entered Deep Heaven City, he met Old Man Liu from Spirit Flight Hall. As for the person to his side, he appeared to be a sickly scholar, but he also wore a kind expression. So it was Brother Liu and Brother Ayang. Didn't you two come here earlier than me? It seems your missions were finished smoothly. Han Li chuckled, refraining from mentioning his brush with death with the Wood tribe. Old Man Liu shook his head and he said, "How could our mission compare with yours? I simply followed a few golden guards as they wiped out a few small strongholds held by foreign races. So long as I was a bit careful, I wasn't in any danger." Han Li smiled and asked, "Apart from your two, have any others come?" Old Man Liu flashed a beaming smile and said, "Of course, our journey requires many people. Although we predicted that about half of our numbers wouldn't be able to arrive, just about everyone we needed has arrived. Let me guide you." "Then I'll have to trouble you," Han Li saluted him. Han Li followed the two and streaked towards the icy mountain. After a short journey, the old man in the lead took out a jade badge and held it out in the air in front of him. A wave of white light flew out from the badge and revealed a field of white lotuses that flashed with light. Old Man Liu commanded the light and entered one of the white lotuses, which soon flashed before disappearing. Han Li blinked. He and the scholar soon followed. There was a layer of illusion formations that were placed there. It was quite mysterious since he hadn't been able to see it. In that case, if an ordinary ancient beast arrived nearby, it wouldn't discover anything odd about the mountain. The 3 flickered several times with light as they flew above the mountain top and dropped down in front of an ice pavilion. There was a group of various styled ice buildings nearby. There was also a man and 2 women that were keeping watch of the pavilion. When they saw the 3 arrive, their sights focused on Han Li. Letter 1D487, letter 1D667, letter 1D658, letter 1D4E, letter 1D500, letter 1D4E, letter 1D658, letter 1D490, letter 1D4AT. The man possessed a large stature and wore gray robes. His full beard gave him a bold appearance. One of the women appeared over 40 years old, wore azure robes and had an ordinary appearance. The other woman appeared young, wore green robes and wore a veil. When Han Li saw the veiled woman, he yelped, "Fairy Ying, I didn't think that you would take the invitation too. What a coincidence," Han Li called out to her in surprise. The veiled woman replied with a sweet smile, "I knew you'd be here. I can be considered a founding member." She was Fairy Ying, who had invited Han Li to team up when he last attended a meeting for ascended cultivators. "A founding member, that is truly outside my expectations," Han Li chuckled. When Han Li was invited to join the group, Fairy Yin wasn't among those who met him, but he still found them to be trustworthy. As for the people who initiated this gathering, Han Li didn't care much about that. Han Li flickered his gaze and swept his eyes past the other 2. The two appeared familiar, as if he had seen them before at the meeting for ascended cultivators. However, he didn't seem to have talked to them before. The lowest cultivation the three possessed was at mid-deity transformation stage. The older woman in particular was a late deity transformation cultivator. Thus Hanli saluted them. The large man and the older woman promptly returned his salute, not daring to neglect him. The veiled woman soon invited Hanli to take a seat in the pavilion. After some thought, Hanli shook his head and said, "I've received a few wounds on my mission, and I've spent some magic power flying without rest. I'll need to recover. If I remember correctly, there is still a month before the determination meeting time." Old man Liu twirled his beard and spoke with a friendly face. We've overlooked that. Please take a rest. We'll talk to you later. The rooms on the very left don't have anyone in them. Go ahead and choose one. Of course, if you are dissatisfied, you can construct your own." "Then I'll go ahead." Hanli faintly smiled and bid them a few words of farewell. He then walked to one of the ice rooms and disappeared inside with a few flickers. As the few cultivators looked at Hanli's back, silence filled the air. The woman slightly frowned and slowly asked, "Is Brother Han hurried to rest because his injuries are severe?" "It shouldn't be. His complexion is fine. It's probably just that he's low on magic power." The large gray-robed man shook his head. Very Yin indifferently said, "That might not be the case. If Hanli possesses exceptional concealment techniques, we wouldn't be able to see anything odd. Nevertheless, since he's here on schedule, he's already demonstrated that his abilities are unordinary. Even if he is somewhat ill, I believe that it won't affect our plans." Didn't fellow Taoist Yuan and Master Jing Yuan also head straight to their rooms upon arriving? She clearly had quite a bit of confidence in Hanli. The sickly scholar smiled and said, "Your words make sense. Although fellow Taoist Han is only a mid-deity transformation cultivator, according to my information, his abilities are among our top 3. The older woman was stunned and doubtfully said, "Your words aren't an exaggeration, are they? Fellow Taoist Han is only a mid-deity transformation cultivator. Are you sure?" Veiled woman leisurely explained, "Older sister Zhao has remained in diligent cultivation over these past few years in Deep Heaven City and hasn't taken part in our meetings. It is no surprise you don't know of Brother Han. Fellow Taoist Han had killed many similar grade foreign beings, and he also captured many of them alive. He is quite famous among the newly ascended cultivators in the city. One of his abilities in particular is incredibly effective against shadow tribe beings. This was primarily one of the reasons we went through such great lengths to invite him. Fellow Taoist Ying means that he will be effective in dealing with those shadow bug beasts," the older woman realized. Old man Liu added, "That's right. Otherwise, they will be troublesome to deal with. If we consume that much magic power before we encounter our true prey, that would be awful." The older woman nodded and said nothing else. As for the others, they took a seat and briefly chatted. When Han Li entered the ice room, he sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. About 2 weeks later, a clear and long shriek sounded from the outside. Although it wasn't loud, it roused Han Li and the others that were resting. Han Li's brow moved and he opened his eyes. He blinked and tilted his head in thought. Then he stood up and walked out of the ice building. There was a spacious area in front of the ice building, but at an unknown time, it turned into an icy hall that was 300 meters long. It was supported by many huge pillars of ice. Although they were exceptionally crude, it sparkled under the sunlight and gave it an imposing presence. Inside the hall, there was a 10-meter-tall platform where a man and a woman stood. The man had a head of silver hair and a handsome young face. As for the woman, she wore her hair in a coil and had a well-rounded body, adding to her exceptional beauty. Despite her bare, frail, and flawless limbs, she didn't seem to mind the cold. The two were at the spatial tempering stage. The man in particular was at mid-stage. The long whistle came from the silver-haired man. 5 people were standing below the platform. Fairy Ying and Old Man Liu stood among them. When the whistle sounded, Han Li and the others came out from their buildings. In the blink of an eye, over 20 cultivators appeared on the mountain. The cultivators were all at the deity transformation stage at the very least. They walked to the hall with various expressions. Han Li wore a calm expression as he followed them inside. When the group entered, many people immediately said, "We pay our respects to Senior Zhu and Senior Qing. These 2 seniors have also come. It is good to see you again." Han Li soon found an empty spot and stood there unmoving. The 2 that originally visited and invited him were the pair of famous golden guards, the woman and man on stage. Although he only spoke to them once, he had heard much about them. If they weren't also ascended cultivators, Han Li didn't know if he would have agreed to this meeting, no matter what rewards were promised. Senior Zhu's long whistle had come to a stop and he smiled in response to everyone's greeting. Then he loudly said, "It appears everyone has come. Please have a seat. Let's have a proper discussion on how we'll clean up the nest of blue-eyed true toads." When he finished speaking, the woman at his side immediately released a spell seal on the floor. Suddenly, the ice hall lit up with white light, and rows of exquisite jade chairs appeared as a result of simple spell formations. When the cultivators saw this, they took a seat. The two spatial tempering cultivators on stage also sat down. The silver-haired man swept his gaze to both sides and smiled. "It appears that the number of cultivators that arrived was what we expected. When we invited you, we assumed 40% would be able to make it. As for the others, they couldn't make it for a myriad of reasons. But even so, we will have to concentrate our efforts in exterminating the blue-eyed true toad next. When the time comes, we will all take what we need. You will divide the true toad spirit blood among yourselves, while we will take the 1,000-heart flowers that the beasts are guarding. It is as we had mentioned before. Are there any objections? Of course, the division of true toad spirit blood will be in accordance to what you contribute. It won't be evenly split. I hope that you will stifle your thoughts about having a free ride." With that said, a huge pressure faintly emitted from his body and his face turned stern. The other cultivators in the room remained standing and added nothing else. "Good, since you understand, let's discuss the operation's concrete steps. The group of true toads were discovered by Fairy Ying. Let's have her explain." The youth smiled and turned to the veiled woman. "Senior Zhu, your wish is my command." Fairy Ying smiled and she gracefully stood up. She swept her gaze past the other cultivators and said, "I won't speak of how I discovered the true toad nest, but I can tell you that there are nearly 10 toads. The 2 fully mature toads are around the level of mid-spatial tempering. The other toads will be at nascent soul strength. The toads have always hidden in the depths of their nest and rarely head out. If we wish to attack their nest, it will become very difficult. After all, it will be difficult for us to fight them in that environment." With that said, the woman briefly paused and continued, "If it was just that, there would be no need to invite you all here. The crucial point is that there are 2 types of ferocious beasts living nearby. One of them is the black blood ants, with the other being a shadow insect beast. The 2 insects might not be anything alone, but they live together in a group over 100. If we want to deal with the toads, we'll need to deal with these insects first." Black blood ants. Shadow insect beasts. When they heard the masked woman, most of the cultivators began to whisper. There were even a few that didn't dare to discuss the topic with their neighbors. The 2 insects were actually quite infamous. If the insects were 3, they would pose a large threat even against spatial tempering cultivators. After she finished speaking, the veiled woman nodded to the silver-haired youth and sat back down. Senior Zhu calmly said, "There is no need to be nervous. Since we've invited you here, we already have a method to deal with them. We only need you to assist us with vigor." An old man with a bamboo hat stood up and bowed, saying, "Senior Zhu, it's not that we don't trust you, but the matter appears quite dangerous. Could Senior explain his plan?" The old man was one of the few late deity transformation cultivators. "So it was fellow Taoist you. Please sit back down. Even if you didn't mention it, I still would have explained." Senior Zhu smiled nonchalantly. The old man didn't speak any further and sat down with a salute. "It's quite simple. The 2 insects may be troublesome, but we've purchased sandalwood crane incense. It has an immensely powerful attractive allure to the black blood ants. So long as we light it from a distance, we can easily attract them to the surface and exterminate them. On the contrary, the shadow insects are troublesome to deal with. However, we've borrowed a set of profound heavenly lightning flags. With 8 of you using this treasure, we can form a ring of lightning and restrain the insects. Apart from that, we also invited fellow Taoist Han and Fairy Zio, who both have techniques that will be effective against the insects. With you 2 assisting the lightning formation, it should be safe. As for the remaining few, they will join with me and my wife in exterminating the true toads. How do you feel about this?" Senior Zhu's voice wasn't loud, but it was easily heard. When Han Li heard Senior Zhu mention his own name, his expression stirred, and he swept his gaze past the hall, finding that many were looking in his direction. There was also a woman wearing silver-white robes that appeared in her 20s. She possessed a dainty appearance and looked at Han Li with a warm smile. Han Li unconsciously returned the smile and curiously thought, could it be she is Fairy Zio? She also cultivates an ability that can restrain the shadow insects. Follow that, other cultivators would occasionally ask a question. Fairy Zhu answered all of the questions with a friendly tone, satisfying all the cultivators present. However, Han Li took notice that the beautiful woman at his side rarely said a word from the very start. She merely stood there with a smile. Han Li found this odd. He recalled that when they invited him to this meeting, only the handsome youth seemed to speak. She hadn't spoken at all. Could it be that the woman is a high-ranking Buddhist and practices that strange technique that requires a vow of silence? Otherwise, if she were deaf or mute, how would she be able to cultivate to this stage? Han Li inwardly pondered. After 2 hours passed, there were no other questions and Senior Zhu began to divide them. It stood to mention that apart from Han Li and Fairy Zio, there were actually many cultivators among them that practiced a rare lightning technique, allowing them to use the profound heavenly lightning flags and form a ring lightning formation. All of those present were ascended cultivators or the descendants of ascended cultivators. None of them had been born naturalized with this world. Therefore, although their numbers were many, they didn't care much about how they were divided. When they were all given an assignment, Senior Zhu didn't have an intention of delay and promptly gave a command, ordering the 20-some people to depart. They all flew west. After 3 entire days of flight, the party eventually arrived in front of a huge lake. With a single glance, they saw a dense and salty mist from the lake, giving it a mysterious presence. Many of the cultivators couldn't help but frown at the sight. Normally, most cultivators were unwilling to enter strange areas in the wilderness like this one, as it was unknown what lurked in the mist and the lake. If they were ambushed, it would be a brush with death. Without need for a warning, everyone slowed their speed and stopped in front of the mist. The silver-haired spatial tempering youth, Senior Zhu, loudly announced from the front, "Fellow Taoists, be careful. There is an unknown demon bird in the mist, but fortunately they aren't very strong. So long as you are careful of the acid they spit, it shouldn't be fine. As for the mist itself, let me and my wife deal with it." Afterwards, the others waited as the silver-haired youth opened his mouth and spat out a long white jade bottle. It spun in the air and had its mouth pointed at the white mist. The youth formed a hand gesture with both his hands and muttered an incantation, causing the jade bottle to brightly light up. A muffled crackle sounded, followed by the bottle releasing an azure wind. When the wind flew out, it only carried a faint azure light, but after it traveled 10 meters, it blew into a raging gale. Then in the blink of an eye, it turned into a violent tornado. The mist on the surface of the lake violently roiled as it split apart. A clear path opened in the mist. "We go." With Senior Zhu's command, he and his wife took the initiative to first fly through the path. The jade bottle he earlier released began to circle above his head and continued to release violent gales. Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D604, letter 1D41E, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D696. When the others saw this, they felt a sense of relief and followed after them. As Senior Zhu had mentioned, after they entered 5 kilometers in, meter-long white birds with flat beaks and dark green claws began to appear from the surrounding mist. The birds were clearly targeting the cultivators. As soon as they emerged from the mist, they opened their mouths and released black ice arrows. With several shouts, the cultivators released their magic treasure, summoning formations of swords or several ancient shields. When the black ice arrows struck, they immediately turned into black smoke. It left dents and numerous holes in the treasures where they struck. The masters of the magic treasure revealed shock when they saw this. One of them immediately shouted, "Quickly kill them. Their acid can corrode our treasures." The others felt their hearts tremble when they heard this and immediately displayed their various techniques. Streaks of swift light and waves of mist moved in the direction of the demon birds. Under the wave of attacks, the demon birds turned into balls of gore and blood, instantly dying in their entirety. When the others saw this, they felt relief. The birds had been truly weak. A quarter-hour later, several strange cries sounded from the mist. Suddenly, another flock of white birds flew out from the mist and pelted the cultivators with black ice arrows. Startled, the cultivators flusteredly released their treasures and blocked the attacks before exterminating the birds once more. When the last of the birds turned into a bloody pulp, many bird silhouettes began to appear from the mist. The cultivators became restless when they saw this, and many of them wore expressions of unease. Han Li frowned and he swept his spiritual sense through the mist. Bird cries began to sound out from the mist surrounding them from every direction, including from above and below them. There were too many to keep track of. Although Han Li had encountered many dangers, even this caused him to feel a chill on his back. Senior Zhu's calm voice sounded from the front. "Everyone, don't be scared. These birds are only launching probing attacks on us. When they see that a dozen waves of their attacks are ineffective, they will scatter." When the others heard this, they began to activate their treasures and slaughtered any of the white birds that came to attack them. 13 waves of the birds attacked them in succession. Eventually, long sharp cries sounded from the flocking birds and they scattered, withdrawing from the mist around them. When the cultivators saw this, they felt relief and seized the opportunity to head forward. Half a day later, the mist cleared around them. Their surroundings lit up and they saw a huge mountain at the center of the lake. It was overwhelmingly large and seemed to reach out from the bottom of the lake. The portion of the mountain they could see was filled with green stone. Apart from the moss that grew on top of them, there were no other plants. After the group came to a stop, Senior Zhu clicked his tongue and said, "It is here. We have to thank Fairy Ying and her comrades in finding this place." The veiled woman chuckled and said, "We found this mountain unintentionally as we were pursuing a beast. This was only a fortunate encounter." Senior Zhu laughed and spoke with excited eyes. "In truth, if one isn't lucky, it would be difficult to find this secret land. Nevertheless, we came across a group of true toads. If it were on the outside, it would have been likely found by others. Let us start." The other cultivators nodded with a smile. The true toad nest is located in a natural underground cave at the bottom of the mountain. We'll act as we originally planned. We'll first attract the black blood ants and kill them. Everyone be careful. Although the ants are a grade 8 demon beast, they are innately capable of breaking our defensive shields and light. Furthermore, they are incredibly venomous. If they bite us, immediately swallow an antidote or your life will be forfeit. All right, everyone prepare yourselves. I will light the sandalwood crane incense. Following his quick warning, Senior Zhu flipped his hand and suddenly produced a palm-sized incense burner. He struck a half-foot-long stick of green incense. He flung the incense burner up where it slowly revolved in midair. Senior Zhu raised his hand and flicked his finger, igniting the incense with a flash of red light. The green incense stick then released a trail of azure smoke. When Han Li looked at the incense burner, an odd expression appeared on his face. The sandalwood crane incense looked unremarkable and it didn't have much of a scent either. Was it truly effective against the black blood ants? Han Li worriedly mused. At that moment, the cultivators began to separate and conceal themselves. Han Li was among them, flying 300 meters up. Just as he was about to cast a technique, a white streak flickered and a slender silhouette appeared by his side. Han Li was stunned and looked at the silhouette. She was the dainty woman, Fairy Zio. The woman was also surprised Han Li chose the same location. She soon smiled and politely said, "Brother Han, I have 100 bewildering lights flag. It is rather marvelous at concealing a location. How about I use it to hide us both?" In that case I'll have to trouble you," Han Li courteously replied. "It is only a slight effort. Brother Han is being too formal." She faintly smiled and raised her hand, producing a small snow-white flag. It then spun a circle above them. The woman struck the flag with a spell seal and it blurred, suddenly producing a white mist. It brilliantly shined, covering them in a mist in the blink of an eye. A moment later, the mist vanished alongside Han Li and Lady Zio. Han Li stood in his original location and raised his hand. Even with his bright-side spirit eyes, he still wasn't able to see it. With a tone of surprise, Han Li praised, "Your treasure is truly marvelous. It is much more powerful than ordinary concealment treasures." Fellow Taoist Han must be joking. This 100 bewildering lights flag may be truly powerful in invisibility, but it isn't capable of concealment from spiritual sense. It is only useful against creatures with weak spiritual sense like these insect beasts. To his surprise, Han Li swept his spiritual sense past the woman and immediately verified her words to be true. He lamented, feeling it was a pity. As his bright-side spirit eyes couldn't see through the invisibility, it would be a formidable treasure if it could also hide from spiritual sense. At that moment, the others also hid and withdrew their aura. A moment later, apart from the small incense burner floating in the air, there was nothing else in sight. The sandalwood crane incense was truly effective. In only the time it took to finish a meal, buzzing sounds came from the direction of the mountain. At an unknown cave at the center of the mountain, a group of large winged ants flew in their direction. The ants were each about half a foot long and were fanged. There was also a pair of green wings on their back. It appeared as if they were flying birds. They were truly startling. It was obvious the ants were heading for the incense burner. Eventually, they made their way from the mountain to the incense and were completely surrounded by the cultivators. Suddenly, the nearby space around the burner fluctuated. Senior Zhu and the beautiful woman appeared at nearly the same time, and he shouted, "Attack!" Lights lit up in every direction, and soon, several tens of treasures appeared, turning into mists of light as they swept at the ant swarm. Large-scale attacks such as fireballs and lightning struck as well. From the fierce barrage, it appeared the cultivators wanted to end the ant swarm in a single strike. With multiple huge explosions, the ants were submerged in rainbow light. Soon, waves of heat and cold swept out from the center of the barrage, forming an immense storm at the center of the explosions. The pressure of the winds even blew the cultivators a few steps back. When the light and winds faded, all the ants disappeared, leaving not even a trace of ash behind. The youthful Senior Zhu and the beautiful woman appeared satisfied by this result, not to mention the surrounding cultivators. Dealing with a trifling swarm of black blood ants with their cultivation like slaying a chicken with a butcher's knife. However, the smooth success of the first step of their plan was a good omen. Letter 1D627, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D452, letter 1D452, letter 1D464, letter 212F, letter 1D624, letter 2134, letter 1D62E. Senior Zhu waved his hand at the incense burner, extinguishing the incense stick and having it returned to him in yellow light. Then, it vanished with a flip of his hand, and in another flash of light, he summoned a set of flickering silver flags. Each of the flags was only several inches large. Purple talisman characters and a few lightning patterns appeared on the flag's surface, giving them an air of mystery. Without any threat from the black blood ants, we will head into the true toad nest. Here is the set of profound heavenly lightning flags. Those assigned to the formation will come up and take a flag. Senior Zhu glanced at the designated cultivators. The cultivators promptly exchanged a glance and immediately flew forward. The first to take a flag was Old Man Liu. "All right, apart from fellow Taoist Zhao and fellow Taoist Zun who will stand on guard outside, the others will follow us inside." The youth pointed out an old man and a middle-aged man, and he then flew into the mountain in streaks of light. The others didn't hesitate and began to follow them in streaks of light. As for the old man and the middle-aged man that was told to stand guard outside, they exchanged a wry laugh. They then concealed themselves. The rest of the cultivators were following Senior Zhu and the beautiful woman into a natural cave inside the huge mountain. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, Han Li and the others appeared in a moist underground passage. The passage was filled with stalactites dripping with water, leaving the ground exceptionally slippery. There was also an inch-tall moss that grew off the ground. It spread throughout the uneven rock in the passage. Fortunately, the passage was quite wide, allowing cultivators to slowly fly through it. It wasn't so short that they would have to walk. Han Li occasionally looked around and saw a few unusual venomous insects flying through cracks in the cave. With a flick of his finger, he released a red thread into the cracks and turned them into ash. Beside him was Fairy Zio. She appeared cautious. A layer of faint white light appeared all over her. Regardless of whatever venomous insect pounced on her, they dropped to the ground covered in crystal. It wasn't only Han Li and Fairy Zio that used small measures to deal with the insects. All the other cultivators were keeping the insects at bay as well. These insects were unremarkable, but none of them dared to get bitten. After all, countless strange things appeared in the wilderness. Even ordinary insects could possibly kill a high-grade cultivator with its poison. Such things had happened before. The cultivators still focused on moving quickly and rarely spoke. Eventually, they remained completely silent. Apart from occasionally exterminating a few insects, there were no other sounds. The passage wasn't too dark. There would be an occasional light that lit off the wall. They resembled the moonlight stones that humans often used. With that, the party continued forward smoothly. A moment later, Han Li's expression stirred, and he took a deep glance at his squad ahead of him. Meanwhile, the Senior Zhu frowned at the very front of the group, and the two spatial tempering cultivators came to a sudden stop. Senior Zhu informed the rest of the cultivators to halt. "Everyone be careful. I sense two beasts in front of us. They have an aura close to deity transformation stage and are blocking our way. It is possible there will be other insects nearby. It is inconvenient for me to use more of my spiritual sense to look for them. We will have to send people over to identify the insects with their own eyes. Be careful and don't attack first." Everyone was startled, but one person immediately stepped forward and said, "Have me take a look. I may not have other techniques, but I am quite confident in my evasion techniques. Will Senior Zhu entrust me with this?" Senior Zhu recognized the man and grinned. "He, so it was Brother Yu. Your wind movement techniques are quite wondrous. You're exactly who I was looking for." The person who stepped forward was the old man wearing a bamboo hat. The old man chuckled and vanished from sight in a gust of wind. Indeed, his wind movement techniques were impressive. Silence filled the air. Many people thought of the insects blocking their path and couldn't help but feel excited. In the time it took to finish a meal, the old man reappeared with a gust where he originally stood. If no one was paying attention, they wouldn't have noticed that the old man was there. The old man bowed to Senior Zhu, saying, "I am done. There are 2 profound whirlpool beasts ahead of us. I fear it will be troublesome." Profound whirlpool beasts, the cultivators became restless. Many of the cultivators revealed surprise. Even Senior Zhu couldn't help but frown. And Li immediately recalled information related to the profound whirlpool beasts. Profound whirlpool beasts weren't particularly fearsome, the exception being in a place like this. The beasts' abilities only had water and lightning movement techniques. Furthermore, they were cowardly and often made their escape with the wind. What was more helpless was that the beasts were also called drumcry beasts. If they discovered any enemy, they would loudly sound out like a huge drum, alerting anything within 100 kilometers. Among humans and demons, there were a few large sects and masters that tamed the beast and used them as alarms in vital areas. If they didn't kill the beasts in a single strike, it would disturb the other insects on the huge mountain. When that time came, who knew what would happen? Senior Zhu sank into thought for a moment and said, "This is rather troublesome. Although I am a spatial tempering cultivator, I am not proficient in concealment techniques. Profound whirlpool beasts have a powerful spiritual sense and sense of smell. However, my wife is quite skilled in movement techniques, but she'll only be able to catch one of them. We'll need another fellow Taoist to dispatch the other one." His sights turned to Old Man Yu. "I won't be any good. My wind techniques will allow me to approach them unnoticed, but against their rough flesh, I wouldn't be able to kill them in a single strike." The old man shook his head. Senior Zhu wryly smiled and turned to look at the other late deity transformation cultivators. The others also frowned as they weren't entirely confident. As it was related to the success of their mission, they didn't dare to accept the task unless they were entirely confident. It was quite difficult to have the speed and strength necessary. Senior Zhu's expression turned sullen. Having planned this for several years, would their success be hindered by 2 mere insects? Could we not use earth movement techniques through the mountain to go around them? One cultivator said doubtfully. If we could do that, why would we go through all this trouble? The mountain is made of a huge vein of spirit magnets. It would forcefully restrain your spiritual power and absorb it if you were to fly through it. It won't be a problem if you don't attempt to phase through the mountain. A vein of spirit magnets. Everyone felt a chill when they heard this. The person that asked this wore a particularly unsightly expression. For a time, no one dared to speak. A voice then lazily sounded from the ground. "Senior Zhu, if I can deal with the other beast, would I receive an additional share of the true toad blood?" The one who spoke was Han Li at the rear of the group. The dainty woman at his side was astonished. Senior Zhu looked at Han Li with surprise and hesitantly said, "Oh, could it be that fellow Taoist Han is confident? If that is the case, the share of true toad blood is yours, but if it fails..." It was clear he only viewed Han Li as a mid-deity transformation cultivator. Senior, don't worry. If I fail, I will take responsibility." Han Li smiled. Senior Zhu resolved himself and nodded. "You truly are confident. Good, I will let you deal with the other insect beast." Whispers began to sound from the other cultivators, and they examined Han Li with various expressions. A few of them wore faces of doubt. Senior Zhu then turned to the old man with a bamboo hat and said, "But for the sake of carefulness, fellow Taoist, you will follow fellow Taoist Han and assist him." "Yes, leave it to me," the old man readily agreed. Following that, Senior Zhu curled his lip and sent a few voice transmissions to his wife. The woman then formed an incantation gesture and glowed with red light before disappearing from sight. Han Li took out a purple talisman and slapped it on his body. Suddenly, silver talisman characters roiled over him and he vanished. Old Man, you also turned into wind. With the old man leading the way, Han Li and the beautiful woman flew forward for a time before arriving at their objective. They arrived at an expansive and wide area. There were two white fat insects lying on the ground. They were eating moss. The two fat insects were 6 meters long, and their flesh was a glossy white as if they were huge larvae. A small head grew from one of the ends. Not only did it have 6 small red eyes, but it revealed a mouthful of strangely large pointed teeth as it chewed on the moss. Han Li was concealed to the point where even a spatial tempering cultivator couldn't detect him. Naturally, he did not worry that 2 trifling deity transformation stage insects would discover him. He boldly floated above one of the insect beasts and swept his gaze around him. With his bright-sight spirit eyes, he saw the other profound whirlpool beast as well as a faint red silhouette standing there. It was the beautiful woman, using an evasion technique. 10 meters behind here, there was a vague azure light drifting in the air. It was old Man Yu that was concealing himself with the power of the wind. The two were looking around bewildered, unable to sense Han Li's presence. Han Li didn't mind, and sent them a few silent voice transmissions to notify them of his position. The two wore a trace of astonishment. The old man then flickered to Han Li's side, not daring to approach 30 meters of the insect beast. From the distance he kept, it was clear he wasn't confident he could keep himself hidden. However, the beautiful woman was a spatial tempering cultivator. She withdrew her astonishment and arrived less than 20 meters away from the beast she targeted. For a time, the 3 cultivators stood completely still. The only sound they could hear was the sound of the insects munching on the moss. A cold glint flashed from Han Li's eyes, and his palm lit up with faint black light. He reached out from the insect beast below him. Gray mist shot out from his fingers, summoning a small black mountain from within it. It dropped down as soon as it appeared. The insect underneath it was an alarm, and its body stirred. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a huge ball of flesh, and its body glowed with blue and white light. But it was already too late. At such a close distance, the insect was swept into the gray light in a flash. The profound whirlpool beast continued to flicker with azure and white light, but the gray light restrained it completely. Seeing that things were far from good, the beast began to violently tremble as formless waves began to surface from its flesh. They were about to scatter in every direction. Han Li smirked and closed his stretched black fingers. Suddenly, the gray light expanded and rustled several times. 8 waves of gray light swept past the beast, absorbing all of the waves of pressures from the beast's body until they were all dissolved by the divine essence-effused light. The profound whirlpool beast twisted and was about to use more of its abilities when a black shadow appeared above its head. A huge explosion followed. The small mountain surged to 30 meters in height as it smashed the immobile creature. However, the creature deserved its reputation of hardy flesh. Even under the huge pressure of the mountain, the insect beast hadn't turned to mush. The insect only continued its squirming as it attempted to break free. But at that moment, Han Li's sleeve trembled and a ball of silver flame shot out. A muffled thud sounded, and the insect immediately turned to ash. The heavenly spirit devouring flames weren't something that a simple insect beast could withstand. Han Li exterminated the beast only in the span of a single breath. With that all done, he turned to look behind him. Old Man Yu was standing 10 meters away with a trace of astonishment on his face. The manner in which Han Li easily slew the profound whirlpool beast left him, a late deity transformation cultivator, in shock. Han Li gave him a faint smile and turned to look at the beautiful woman. The other insect beast had been cleanly sliced in two. The beautiful woman was floating above the insect beast's corpse. There was a half-foot-long fire-red sword suspended in front of her. She looked at Han Li with a trace of surprise. Han Li bowed to the beautiful woman and then turned to the old man. "Brother Yu, these 2 insect beasts have been dealt with. Let's report this to Senior Zhu." "Of course, Brother Han, Senior Qing, please wait a moment," Old Man Yu replied with a clear smile. He then shook his sleeve and released a sound transmission talisman from the way they came. A short moment later, the others rushed over. When the youthful Senior Zhu saw this and heard what happened from Old Man Yu, he wore a satisfied expression. He then uttered a few words of praise to them and continued on their way, not daring to continue on the way. While they traveled, Han Li returned to the very back of the group. This time, the other cultivators looked at him differently. Not many of the late deity transformation cultivators were confident they could kill a profound whirlpool beast in a single strike. The veiled fairy Ying and the dainty Lady Zio couldn't help but take many examining glances in his direction. Han Li turned a blind eye to this and followed them without a word. Not long after they made it through the passage began to curve and they heard dripping water. The breeze in front of them was also moist and exceptionally cold. 100-meter-wide underground river soon appeared before them. From the sound of the rushing water, it appeared to be traveling rather fast. Everyone, listen well. After we cross this river, we will arrive at the true toad nest. I've already mentioned the circumstances of the nest to everyone. The frogs will be easily dealt with, but the shadow insect beasts will be very troublesome. We will be relying on you. Senior Zhu turned from the river and looked in the direction of Han Li and the others. He wore a stern expression. A yellow-robed middle-aged cultivator slapped his chest and pledged, "Don't worry, Senior Zhu. With the profound heavenly lightning formation and the addition of Brother Han and Fairy Zio, the shadow insects definitely won't escape them, no matter their reputation." The other cultivators tasked with carrying the lightning flag spoke in agreement. As for Han Li and Lady Zio, they exchanged a glance and said nothing else. Senior Zhu nodded in satisfaction. He then waved his hand and he was the first to cross the river, followed by the beautiful woman. The others closely followed after him. Meanwhile, outside the huge mountain in the white fog, the old and middle-aged man tasked with guarding the outside were having a casual chat. "Old Zhao, wouldn't you say that Senior Zhu and the others have made it to the true toad nest by now? With 2 fully mature blue-eyed true toads, everyone will have a large share even with the size of our group. The young frog's blood isn't as useful, but it also has a partial effect. This is well worth the long and arduous trip. It is only a pity that we were assigned on guard duty. We may have the last share of the spirit blood." The blue-robed middle-aged man grumbled to the white-robed old man standing beside him. The old man chuckled and carelessly replied, "It seems fellow Taoist Zun feels unresigned. Don't think it'll be easy to receive benefits from entering the nest. Perhaps one of them will die." The middle-aged cultivator frowned and doubtfully said, "Die? That can't be. Senior Zhu and the others have completely prepared themselves. It should go smoothly. What danger is there?" The old man sighed and lazily said, "It appears this is the first time that you've head deep into the wilderness. It'll be best if you remember that nothing goes perfectly in the wilderness. Even as we stand guard, a large number of deity transformation or spatial tempering grade ancient beasts or foreign beings could attack us." The middle-aged cultivator bellowed with laughter, "Old Zhao, aren't you exaggerating? This place is so hidden. How can something like that happen?" The old man shook his head and refrained from speaking any further when his face abruptly changed. Bright lights suddenly shined from the neck of the middle-aged cultivator. His head fell off in a blur, leaving behind a meter-tall fountain of blood from his neck. "Not good." The old man managed to react in time and noticed something was wrong. He suddenly shot away and shook his sleeve, summoning a small azure shield in front of him, covering him in a barrier of light. He then spat out a red streak that revolved around him. However, this was no use at all. The space above the old man's head fluctuated, and a 3-meter-large azure-black claw appeared from space. It sliced through the old man's sword and defenses at lightning speed and closed its grip. With a miserable scream, the claw crushed the old man into a ball of gore. Even his nascent soul couldn't escape. The middle-aged cultivator's headless body then trembled, and a ball of green light shot out from it. It was a 2-inch-large nascent soul. It held a badge and was flusteredly escaping. But just as the nascent soul was about to blink 100 meters away, a black mist flew over and covered it. It blurred and promptly disappeared. The 2 deity transformation-grade cultivators were both destroyed in a single strike. A moment later, black and azure light flickered nearby. A huge and a smaller figure suddenly appeared nearby. One of them was 30 meters tall and had a dark face with fierce fangs and 2 horns. He strongly resembled a giant devil. The other was 3 meters tall and was slender. She appeared to be a beautiful woman. She held a pole and a blue axe in her hands that was as tall as she was. The 2 had a pair of scarlet flesh wings that flickered with various ancient talisman characters. The flight that flashed appeared mesmerizing. Not bad. The nascent soul of a deity transformation-grade cultivator is quite filling. The axe-wielding woman glanced at the headless corpse and used her snake-like tongue to lick her lips. She begrudgingly said, "It's a bit of a waste for you to destroy the other one." The devil-like giant uttered with a rumbling voice, "I only recently advanced through my bottleneck, so I can't control my strength very well. Besides, it's merely the nascent soul of a deity transformation cultivator. We're looking for the nascent soul of spatial tempering cultivators. Now that is truly filling. If we can consume a pair of body integration cultivator nascent souls, it'll be possible for us to advance to Xianxia kings. The young woman interrupted her companion's daydream and frowned, saying, "Body integration grade cultivators. That's to see if we can even kill one. We wouldn't be able to even if we teamed up. All right, enough talk. We have important business. I didn't think that we'd come across human cultivators so quickly. We should still be half a year away from Deep Heaven City." The horned giant flapped its wings and sinisterly laughed. "It is strange. They are most likely humans that have come looking for treasure. As we've killed them, we've done our duty. Even if others have escaped, let's leave them to the others behind us. We're only responsible for dealing with clear objectives." "That's right, let's go. In a moment the main army will arrive." The beautiful woman nodded with a smile. She then blurred and promptly vanished. The giant then loudly bellowed and absorbed the headless body into his mouth. With several noisy chews, he swallowed it and flapped his wings as he disappeared into the air. Letter 1D68 F, letter 1D563, letter 1D556, letter 1D680, letter 1D680, letter 1D680, letter 1D554, letter 1D428, letter 1D558. Not long after the two foreign beings left, a strange drone sounded from the horizon. It was soft at first, but the sound gradually became louder as a black dot appeared, followed by 2 and 3. In the blink of an eye, countless black dots filled the sky like an overwhelming swarm. There were thousands upon thousands of black dots. They traveled quickly and arrived at the huge mountain in the blink of an eye. At that moment, the true appearances of the black dots were clear to see. They were winged people similar to the giant and the woman. Their arms and legs were bare. They only wore enough to cover their hidden parts. There were a huge number of giants as well as winged women. These winged foreign beings continuously moved through the sky, wave after unbroken wave. Even after 2 hours, black dots continued to appear from the horizon as if their numbers were unending. Suddenly, the sound humming through the air suddenly sounded with thunderous booms. Mountain-like colossuses soon appeared. They were 2 to 3 kilometers tall, and their bodies were faintly yellow. They were conic beehives that slowly revolved in the air around them. In front of the colossuses were winged serpents covered in lightning and had over a dozen heads. They were slowly pulling them forward. To the side of the beehives, there were troops of winged foreign beings that were fully armored and armed. They seemed to be escorting the colossuses. The creatures appeared rather clumsy, but they were actually extremely fast. They brought a storm with them as they traveled, scattering even the fog below them. As for the huge beehives, they provoked the white birds lurking in the mist, causing them to pelt them with black ice arrows. When the silver-armored foreign beings saw this, they waved their huge blades, slaughtering them like a tiger in a flock of sheep, slaughtering most of them in a brief moment. When the other birds saw this, they fled back into the mist with cries. The foreign beings didn't pursue them. Instead, they simply withdrew and continued to escort the towering giants. These huge beehives began to appear alone from the horizon, but they became rather large in size. It seemed each one housed a large number of winged foreign beings. As the huge beehives continued to arrive from the horizon, some of them were enormous. Then after 100 of these huge hives appeared, they ceased, only to be followed by groups of strange ancient beasts. There were those with 3 heads and 2 wings, or a dragon's head and a bird's tail, with bodies exceeding 300 meters in size, some that were only a meter long, or even those with several winged beings controlling them. Some of them appeared quite majestic, and there were untold different species of them. As these ancient beasts flew over, shuttles of black light appeared from the horizon. They were 100 meters long and were quite pointed. There were many of these long shuttles, only about 1,000, but their speed was quite. In a blur, they arrived from one end of the horizon to another. As such, a moment later, there were no more shuttles. The sky then turned clear. But not long after, light flashed and another group of black dots appeared. If any humans saw the appearance of these beings, they would feel their blood run cold. These strange winged beings appeared mostly human-like, those preceding them with ugly males and beautiful females. However, in each of the groups, there were several huge foreign beings that were far larger than the others, being 100 meters tall. They were clad in gold or silver armor with ancient talisman inscriptions on their bodies. There were even various sharp bone horns producing their faces in a fiendish manner, as if they were demons. A group of these foreign beings flew far slower than the others. Furthermore, whenever these beings drew near, a few of them would immediately dive down and scatter around. Many of them dived into space as well. As for the two giant beings in the group, they simply floated motionlessly with stiff expression. Floating between the two giants, there was a winged being with a fiendish appearance with folded arms. Not only was this person's wings several times larger than others of his kind, but his eyes were also faintly gold and his flesh was crimson red. He was coldly looking at the others as they searched, but soon, his golden eyes stirred and they fell on a huge catching mountain below him. Not long after, over 100 different foreign beings flew back and they stood at attention. They all appeared quite docile. The forward group encountered to deity transformation grade cultivators. It was nearby, here right. A young woman respectfully answered, "Sir Meng Xiang, the information should have been correct, but apart from that mountain, we found no other traces of humans. The mountain seems to contain a vein of spirit magnet stone. We cannot directly see it." "A vein of spirit magnet stone, that is quite remarkable. Let's open it up." The golden-eyed foreign being sneered and he soon raised his hand. A crimson light flashed. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a pulsing blood-red light sphere. He closed his hand, and the light sphere twirled and blurred forward. A streak of light shot out from his hand, but it immediately surged to an unbelievable size. It covered half the sky. The foreign being then flipped his palm and casually waved it forward. A red light suddenly flashed from the top of the mountain. Then it appeared completely ordinary. At that moment, two huge foreign beings waved their arms and fiercely released attacks at the mountain. A huge force seemed to appear where the huge line appeared, and a chain of attacks struck in a combined wave. Then a huge explosion sounded, and the huge mountain released a series of groans. Half of the mountain slid off like sliced tofu. Inside a huge cave, Han Li had flickering gray mist covering his body. It was an impenetrable defense, but he wore an unsightly expression as he looked 20 meters in front of him. There was a large gray-robed man that was split into two. He was lying in a pool of blood. At his side was a small flag that flickered with lightning. Han Li felt his heart shiver. A brief moment ago, a red light flashed there where the large man happened to be. He then fell in two halves. As such, the spell formation created from the flags fell apart, and the fist-sized black shadows immediately escaped from the lightning. The other cultivators were stunned and then revealed a furious alarm. Lady Zio was also shocked. A mist of light flashed from the other side of the cave 100 meters away, followed by a chain of explosions. Senior Zhu and another dozen cultivators were attacking the true toad nest. Han Li's heart stirred. Just as he thought to sweep the 100 shadow insects in his divine essence-effused light and prevent their escape, he suddenly felt huge vibrations as half of the mountain began to fall. At that same moment, there was an underground river began to roil and surge with waves that were 30 meters tall. The entire cave began to collapse, inch by inch. Just as Han Li realized what was going on, he was aghast and immediately formed an incantation gesture, increasing his protective mist several-fold as a wave of water engulfed him. In the time it took to make a cup of tea, a dozen streaks of light flew out from the remaining half of the huge mountain. Light flashed away and a dozen silhouettes appeared in the air. Senior Zhu and the others looked around and their faces turned bloodless. Surrounding them were over 100 winged foreign beings. They were staring at the cultivators like prey. From their aura, they were all at least deity transformation stage. There were at least 7 of them at spatial tempering stage. The golden-eyed being looked at their cultivation and indifferently said, "So there are many humans but with only 2 at spatial tempering stage. I am disinclined to deal with you. You kill them. If you can leave them alive, do it. We'll interrogate them." Then with a flap of his wings, the foreign being vanished over 300 meters away. He flickered twice and vanished from sight. Apart from splitting apart the enormous mountain, the gold-eyed foreign being did nothing else. Senior Zhu's face turned pale. He wasn't able to see through the cultivation of the golden-eyed Yaksha, but with a trace of hope in his heart, he asked, "The Yaksha tribe, our species have yet to fight. There was no reason to disturb our treasure hunt. What is the reason for surrounding us?" "Attack." The order came from the strongest of the 100 Yakshas, a woman that gave Senior Zhu an enchanting smile. However, her voice was unmistakably icy. The surrounding Yakshas immediately brandished their huge axes and blades, launching fierce streaks of light from every direction towards the surrounded cultivators. The situation was similar to how the human cultivators had launched full-scale attacks on the black blood ants earlier, but with the positions reversed. Although there was a large difference in numbers and powers between the humans and the foreign beings, Senior Zhu and the cultivators weren't about to succumb at the first blow. In their terror, the cultivators released their strongest treasures, blocking the barrage of attacks with their utmost power, causing a clash of rainbow lights. Among the cultivators, there were many that used evasion and concealment techniques to directly blur through space as they attempted to flee. In furious alarm, Senior Zhu blurred and arrived at the beautiful woman's side. The two clasped palms and blue-red light flickered from either of them. They then spat out a small flag. The two small flags were densely covered in unknown talisman characters. As soon as the flags appeared, they glared with light and fused into one, creating a red-blue barrier that enveloped them both. At that moment, the blade streak swept through the air, wildly slashing at the barrier and leaving white marks. In huge rumbling explosions, the streaks ruptured largely. The human cultivators forcefully blocked the attacks for a moment with their various techniques and treasures, but soon, the attacks pierced through and completely submerged them. Miserable screams shouted in succession after the explosion. But several huge blade lights ceased attacking the group of cultivators. Instead, they shifted directions to the space far away. White arcs strangely crossed the air, and crimson light lit up through the air. Several split corpses then appeared and fell. These concealed cultivators weren't able to escape the attention of the Xianxias and were easily killed. At that moment, the light that the cultivators amassed turned dim. What were originally over 10 cultivators were reduced to a sparse 6. Among them included the two spatial tempering cultivators. Their protective treasure was truly powerful. It was able to block the combined attacks of the Xianxias. As for the others, they had turned to ash. Regardless of whether it was the spatial tempering cultivator's huge flag or the other cultivators' several treasures, their light had turned dim with small cracks appearing on several of them. It was clear these treasures were damaged and couldn't sustain another barrage. But having survived the Xianxia's initial attack, they weren't about to sit still and accept death. Senior Zhu and the beautiful woman pointed at the huge flag in front of them. It spun as it turned back into two and brightly glowed. It released huge trembles before rupturing simultaneously. A red and a blue wind appeared and soared to the sky in the blink of an eye. Senior Zhu and the beautiful woman blurred, turning into two streaks of light as they fused with the two gales that appeared. Afterwards, they activated their techniques, turning the two gales into a kilometer-tall tornado. Thunder rang through the air as it overbearingly charged through the sky. When the Xianxias blocking their way saw the frightening power of the storm, they were thrown into disarray, even with their violent, cruel nature. The remaining humans were delighted when they saw this, and they took advantage of this opportunity to chase after the storm. The other cultivators clearly understood that unless they took this last lifeline, their lives would be forfeit. Wherever the blue-red tornado brushed past, the nearby space would become blurred and twisted, a clear sign of its might. When the storm charged towards the group of Xianxias, two huge black shadows appeared above the tornado. Before the other cultivators realized what was going on, 4 explosions sounded. 4 waves of a huge invisible force struck the top of the storm. The tornado trembled and was forcefully blocked in its original location. Originally, there were a couple of 200-meter-tall Xianxias that had remained suspended in the air. They had blurred and strangely appeared at both sides of the tornado. Their building-sized fists smashed down with immense force and blocked the tornado in its path. Senior Zhu and the beautiful woman were greatly alarmed. Without another thought, they immediately utilized the entirety of this magic power. The blue-red tornado trembled and increased by nearly half its size in an attempt to force their way through. However, the two giant Xianxias were like mountains. Red light flashed through both their eyes as their arms blurred and bodies blurred. Countless afterimages blurred at the giant fists pummeled either side of the tornado. In a short moment, the tornado was thoroughly suppressed by the barrage of attacks. When the nearby cultivators saw this, they were aghast and scattered, fleeing in every direction. At that moment, the sound of splitting air sounded from the air around them as countless blade streaks whistled. The 100 Xianxias surrounding the cultivators released their second wave of attacks. Not only did the remaining cultivators wear expressions of terror, but Senior Zhu and the beautiful woman had bloodlessly pale complexions. A huge world-shaking eruption sounded, filling up the entire area. Deep underground, Han Li was wrapped in flickering gray light as he quickly fled. Strangely enough, there was silver-gray light that lit up his surroundings and continuously rubbed against his protective light, creating sparks of friction. Han Li wore an extremely grave expression. Although he didn't emerge from the ground like the other cultivators, he had recently heard a huge explosion from above ground. Even as deep under as he was, he still sensed the vibrations. Its fearsome power was clear to see. Could it be that the other cultivators were completely exterminated? Han Li felt his heart tremble. When the underground cave had collapsed entirely along with the mountain, the cultivators were in the middle of the spirit magnet vein and didn't dare to flee through the earth. They could only rise to the ground. But Han Li, with his divine essence-effused light, he was able to restrain the 5 elements and many of the world's magnetic restrictions. As such, he took the risk of fleeing underground. In addition, when the mountain collapsed, his immense spiritual sense also detected very powerful foreign beings above them, and he didn't dare to delay. He immediately covered himself in the essence-effused light, and he dived underground. But after a short moment underground, the injured blue-eyed true toads emerged from their underground cave, right towards Han Li. With such a fortunate matter knocking on his door, he didn't allow them to pass him by. With no regard for his magic power, he released many of his abilities and exterminated the true toads. He then recovered their bodies and head on his way. As for the 1,000 heart flowers that Senior Zhu was looking for, he didn't have the time to look for them. The spirit magnet vein was far more fearsome than Han Li anticipated, but his divine essence-effused light was nothing to scoff at either. By using the power of the divine essence-effused mountain, he was able to forcefully protect himself and block the huge attractive force deep in the mountain. Although the foreign tribes were powerful, they wouldn't dare to chase him into the earth as they would be in range of the spirit magnet vein. After some thought, Han Li felt relieved. It was a pity that he couldn't use his spiritual sense to scout for him, as the spirit magnet vein blocked it, or else he would feel even more assured. As Han Li's thoughts whirled through his head, he eventually traveled thousands of kilometers underground and found that the silver light surrounding him began to grow dim. The silver light eventually disappeared and Han Li's expression stirred. Feeling more at ease, he swept his spiritual sense above ground. There was an unfamiliar valley above him surrounded by 3 mountains and had only one entrance. It was dense with foliage and didn't have anything out of the ordinary. He could sense the aura of foreign beings of huge ancient beasts. Han Li repeatedly swept his spiritual sense several times before finally feeling at ease. He then tunneled up in an azure streak. When his surroundings lit up, he withdrew his flight light and floated 100 meters in the air. When Han Li swept his gaze around and his sights focused on a nearby area, he felt a cold chill shake his body and hold him in place. Above a huge tree 300 meters away, there were 2 tall devilish yakshas. They stood there looking in different directions. The 2 yakshas had a pair of huge wings and they were over 30 meters tall. When they glanced at Han Li, they appeared greatly surprised. But what left Han Li dumbstruck wasn't that he saw the 2 yakshas, but that he wasn't able to sense their aura in the slightest. When his spiritual sense swept past them, he hadn't detected them in the slightest. It was as if nothing was there. Han Li clearly realized what this meant. The 2 yakshas possessed cultivation far beyond his own. They were likely the so-called yaksha kings. As such, he couldn't help but hold his breath. As Han Li inwardly cursed, the 2 yakshas had yet to take any action. They simply looked at an area a kilometer away. A light flashed and another rainbow light shot out of the ground. There was another cultivator that appeared. Han Li was stunned when he saw this. The light that emerged from the ground was a dainty woman on top of a rainbow jade boat. She was Lady Xiao. When she saw Han Li, her expression lit up and thought to call out to him. But when she saw the 2 motionless yakshas, her complexion paled. One of the yakshas wore an odd expression and said, "How strange. From their smell, they should be 2 of the humans that our king detected earlier. Those fellows are useless. They can't even handle such an easy task." The yaksha that spoke was the one that cleaved the mountain, Meng Xiang. It was unknown why he was here. The other yaksha chuckled and said, "Indestructible king, there is a spirit magnet nearby. They were able to fly underground without being affected. Please don't blade your subordinates." The first yaksha king snorted and raised his hand, producing a cloud of crimson light from his hand. "That still isn't a reason to let these 2 escape. When I return, I will have to properly punish them. You 2 must have some skill to be able to make it this far, but your lives end here." Han Li's and Lady Xiao's expression greatly changed. With a ring of thunder and gust of wind, a rainbow phoenix phantom and an azure bird phantom appeared from Han Li's back. They flashed and turned into a pair of crystalline wings. As for Lady Xiao, her small rainbow boat shouted, unfolding as it turned into a five-headed worm. The rainbow worm bared its fangs in a menacing appearance. When the other Yaksha saw Han Li's and Lady Zio's abilities, his eyes lit up and he called out to his companion, Indestructible King, wait. These humans appear to be unordinary cultivators. That person seems to have the true phantoms of a heavenly phoenix and a cunning. The other one seems to have a true dragon variant, the sliver of the soul of a rainbow worm. How surprising. Chakravarti, what are you saying? Could it be you want me to let them go? And I am not fond of being called by my title. Call me by my name. The first Yaksha frowned. Although the crimson light faded from his hand, he turned his head and wore a displeased expression. That was only something I overlooked. Esteemed Meng Xiang, why must we quarrel endlessly on this matter? Why don't we make use of these two for a gamble? The Yaksha named Chakravarti chuckled. A gamble? On what? Meng Xiang's expression stirred, guessing what his companion meant. Letter 1D4 1F, letter 1D563, letter 1D556, letter 1D4 1E, letter 1D430, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D428, letter 1D426. It's quite simple. Let's settle our previous dispute on a gamble. We'll act separately to kill them. Whoever is successful will determine the winner. Chakravarti sinisterly smiled. Meng Xiang coldly asked, HMPH, two trifling deity transformation cultivators. They'll die in a single strike. How do we determine the winner? With a plan in mind, Chakravarti said, they aren't common deity transformation cultivators. Furthermore, we won't personally attack them. Why don't we release our demented minions to attack them? We'll bet on how they deal with the humans. Meng Xiang's expression wavered for a moment. After finding the conditions acceptable, he agreed, demented minions. Fine, let's have it your way. Could it be that you fear that you'll be outdone? Very good. Chakravarti widely smiled and turned to the humans, sternly saying, you humans hurt us. Don't say that we were bullying you. We're giving you a chance at life. We'll first let you go for 500 kilometers. Then we'll release our demented minions to pursue you. Take note that you had best not separate. If you separate more than 50 kilometers from one another, we will personally hunt you. 500 kilometers. Han Li stroked his transparent wings with a calm expression. Chakravarti coldly said, that's right. If you don't arrive in the time it takes to burn an incense stick, we'll release our demented servants regardless. Don't think about getting lucky. Han Li's eye twitched and he glanced at the nearby Lady Zio. The woman forced a smile and her complexion slightly improved. The lovely smile complemented her dainty appearance. Right, fellow Taoist Zio, let's go. After a moment of silence, his wings suddenly stirred and he disappeared into space. A moment later, he strangely warped 300 meters away. Afterwards, Lady Zio appeared at his side in the silent blur. She was riding the huge five-headed worm. As Han Li smoothly used his teleportation ability to its perfection, the two Yakshas exchanged a glance. A brief moment of surprise appeared on their face but quickly disappeared. Lady Zio was similarly astonished and wore an expression of joy. Since they were both fleeing for their lives, they had a greater chance of success given Han Li's astonishing ability. Without needing a single word, she stepped on the five-headed worm. The worm moved its head back and forth, immediately wrapping the two in a rainbow mist. Then they shot away at an astonishing speed. Several blinks later, they disappeared from the horizon. The two Yaksha kings stood still in place. They emotionlessly looked at the two cultivators making their escape, as if holding complete confidence in their so-called demented minions. Lady Zio promptly commanded the rainbow light at a speed that would allow them to reach 500 kilometers in nearly an instant. But since the two Yakshas gave them the time of an incense stick burning, when they arrived 50 kilometers away, the woman slowed them down. Afterwards, she slapped her waist and summoned a snow-white jade pendant, turning into a white mist that covered them. This white light pendant is condensed from the utmost yang energy. Even those body integration stage Yaksha kings won't be able to eavesdrop. We can talk here. Lady Zio gave a quick explanation, betraying worry from her face. What do you want to say? I fear we have a slim chance at surviving. Han Li's lip twitched and he wryly laughed. Lady Zio's gaze flickered and she hesitantly asked, are you able to sense the approximate strength of the Yaksha kings? Han Li clearly explained, at the very least, they're equivalent to our body integration cultivators. Although we aren't capable of examining their exact strength, compared to the silver-tier wood spirit I've seen before, I sense that these two Yaksha are much more powerful. I fear they are unordinary existences. Lady Zio cried out in alarm. You mean they are possibly greater Yaksha kings? Even if it isn't the case, I fear they are absolutely close to it. Han Li wasn't completely certain, but even so, Lady Zio wore a difficult expression. Han Li then asked, "Does fellow Taoist Zio know what demented minions are? They seem to hold confidence in them." "I heard my sect elders mention them. They are half-ghost, half-demon beings that are nurtured by Yakshas once they become a king-tier existence. Normally, the Yaksha kings feed them their own blood essence, giving them a portion of the Yaksha king's true strength. Furthermore, their breeds differ as well. They have anywhere from a tenth to a third of a Yaksha king's abilities. They are incredibly fearsome. That is why if they are greater Yaksha kings, I fear we don't stand a chance." Lady Zio gritted her teeth. Han Li's expression wavered when he heard this. Lady Zio quietly said, "As the matter stands, we best quickly give an explanation of our abilities to each other and join together to deal with the enemy." "What, could Lady Zio plan on staking it all against these demented minions?" Han Li asked with a frown. Lady Zio paused. "If we can't repel them, how will we escape?" Han Li took a deep breath and gloomily answered, "Didn't fellow Taoist hear what the Yaksha king said? If the demented minions pursue us, it would be better than if we defeat their minions and force them to personally attack. They didn't promise us anything. They are only making a gamble with our lives." When she heard this, her expression changed. She clearly hadn't thought about it. "Then what do you have planned?" Lady Zio looked at Han Li with bright eyes and asked with a serious tone. Han Li curled his lips and sullenly said, "I have nothing. I only plan on taking it a step at a time. If the demented minions are as fearsome as you say, we won't be able to deal with them. Even if we can't fight them, we can still escape. Still, how will we escape the attention of the two Yaksha kings? Unless our cultivation suddenly surged countless times to the point of entering body integration, it wouldn't be possible. Perhaps if we immediately use a nearby teleportation formation and use it to travel myriad kilometers away, we'd be able to escape them." When she heard Han Li, an odd expression appeared on her face. Han Li sighed and muttered, "However, we should use your suggestion and exchange details of our abilities. Whether we choose to fight them or not, we'll stand a better chance at surviving either way." Lady Zio could only give a wry smile, and soon after, she began to introduce her own abilities and treasures. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, the two of them reached the 500-meter mark despite their slow speed. At that moment, a large distance away, two wolf-like howls shook the sky. Within the five-colored light, the woman with the Zio surname was discussing something with Han Li. Upon hearing this peculiar howl, her expression immediately tensed up as she made a hand seal. The five-colored light around them immediately intensified in brightness before disappearing on the spot along with her and Han Li. The speed at which they had been flying had been multiplied by twofold to threefold. Han Li stood silently on the spot, sensing something with his eyes narrowed, allowing the woman to guide them forward. Even though they were flying much faster than before, the howls erupting from behind them had become a lot clearer after traveling for several hundred kilometers. Han Li said in an indifferent voice, "Those two things are less than 150 kilometers away from us, and their speed outstrips ours, so we'll have to face them sooner or later. It's best to fight them as far away from those two Yaksha monarchs as possible, so let me give you a hand." One of the wings on Han Li's back suddenly flashed as he spoke, and the projection of a massive azure bird abruptly flew forth from it before disappearing into the five-colored light around them. The entire ball of light shuddered violently before they sped up by around twofold once again, transforming into a faint blur that flashed through the air. "Thank you, Brother Han." The woman was elated by development. Han Li shook his head in response and said, "This type of technique is very energy-consuming, so I won't be able to maintain them for too long. Also, we can't get too far away. Otherwise, those two Yaksha monarchs are most likely going to step in." "Of course, you should conserve more of your energy for our upcoming battle," the woman replied with a nod. Han Li gave a wry smile upon hearing this and didn't say anything further. In all honesty, regardless of how powerful those demented minions were, if he were to risk sustaining damage to his spiritual sense by releasing several hundred gold-devouring beetles at once, it'd be no issue for him to force one into retreat or even destroy it. However, there were two of them, and there were also two Yaksha monarchs that were constantly monitoring the situation, so he didn't dare to adopt such a reckless course of action. With Han Li's assistance, the two demented minions behind them were unable to close the gap any further despite their fearsome speed. Thus, they traveled for over several thousand kilometers further in the blink of an eye. Han Li withdrew the azure bird projection when he estimated that the time was right, and he stopped in midair along with his female companion. The two of them hovered in the air, looking on into the distance with unblinking eyes. All of a sudden, fierce flames erupted in the distance. Two crimson clouds that were several tens of feet in size came hurtling toward the two of them like lightning amid thunderous roars. Han Li immediately rubbed his hands together before raising them in unison. Following two loud thunderclaps, two bolts of golden lightning that were as thick as large bowls shot forth directly toward the oncoming crimson clouds. However, the two clouds were seemingly completely insubstantial and extremely agile, evading the arcs of lightning as they continued on toward Han Li, having not been slowed down even in the slightest. Han Li's expression darkened as he quickly made a hand seal, following which the two arcs of golden light changed directions like a pair of spirit snakes, striking the two crimson clouds from an unexpected angle. However, the scenes that unfolded next immediately made Han Li's heart sink. After striking the crimson clouds, the golden arcs of lightning merely disappeared without inflicting any damage. Han Li's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and the two crimson clouds were soon within 200 feet of Han Li and the woman. In such close proximity, the duo could even catch a whiff of the strong smell of blood and gore emanating from the clouds. Strangely enough, Han Li remained completely stationary as he stood on the spot. In contrast, the woman beside him wore a cold expression as she activated her cultivation arts. Two worms that were around 10 feet in length shot forth from the five-colored light before her, chomping down a half of each crimson cloud. The remnants of the crimson clouds also disappeared as a result, and the woman was elated to see this. She was just about to say something to Han Li when the latter's pupils abruptly contracted, and he cautioned, "Be careful, these two things are extremely fast. Take care not to be fooled by them. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D667, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. What? The woman faltered slightly upon hearing this before hurriedly casting her gaze toward the direction that Han Li had his attention focused on. There, in the air several hundred feet away from them, two crimson monsters that resembled a cross between wolves and apes were situated. The instant that the crimson clouds had been destroyed, these two creatures were able to flee from within the clouds, in advance using their phenomenal speed. Their rapid evasion techniques coupled with the soundless manner in which they moved allowed them to fool the woman, but Han Li was able to immediately see through their ploy using his bright-sight spirit eyes. At this moment, these two creatures were standing extremely high up in the air on either side of Han Li's duo. They possessed half-wolf and half-ape bodies with pairs of bat wings on their backs, and their entire bodies were of a vibrant red color. Both of them also had forked tongues like those of snakes, and their red demonic eyes were flashing with a vicious yet cunning light. These were clearly monsters with extremely high levels of intelligence. These were the so-called demented minions. Even though the woman had heard about them before, she was still struck by a bone-chilling sensation upon seeing them in person for the first time. My divine devilbane lightning is ineffective against them, so it looks like they aren't devilish creatures in nature. In that case, Yang attribute attacks most likely won't be very useful in this battle. Looks like we'll have to face them in a head-on battle, Han Li analyzed in an indifferent voice before suddenly placing a hand on the back of his own head. Brilliant gray light erupted before abruptly transforming into a gray light barrier that enshrouded his body. At the same time, a small black mountain slowly emerged from within the gray light. The woman adopted a serious expression before chanting something, and the space before her immediately tremored violently once again. The body of the five-headed worm was also revealed, and it appeared to have grown to several times their original size. The worm was a spirit-like being, and it swayed its heads as it looked up at the demented minions up above, letting loose low snarls in an attempt at intimidation. Right at this moment, one of the demented minions took the initiative and sprang into action. It flapped its vibrant red bat wings, and its entire body shot forth as a crimson blur before disappearing in a flash. Brilliant crimson light erupted, and the demented minion appeared right above Han Li, and the woman before pouncing down without any hesitation. The five worm heads immediately attempted to chomp down on the demented minion in response. However, the demented minion merely swayed, and its body disappeared as if it were evaporating liquid. As such, all five worm heads sunk their teeth viciously into empty air. Before it had figured out what had happened, a series of thin crimson lines appeared over its bodies before vanishing in a flash. Immediately thereafter, the five worm heads along with the massive body they were attached to disintegrated into countless fragments without any premonition. It had been destroyed by the demented minion in what felt like the blink of an eye. Crimson light flashed in the air once again, and countless more of those crimson lines appeared, descending toward the woman standing beside Han Li. Han Li harumphed coldly as the gray light before him extended to instantly shield the woman within. At the same time, the small black mountain flashed and abruptly appeared over her head. Brilliant light erupted from the crimson lines as they flew through the air before slicing into the gray light, tearing it apart without any impediment before crashing into the small black mountain. Almost at the exact same moment, spatial fluctuations erupted in front of Han Li, following which a faint crimson shadow appeared. A pair of sharp claws were extended before swiping through the air in a completely soundless manner. Within the crimson shadow, a pair of cunning eyes were flashing with a vicious light. The other demented minion had taken advantage of the diversion set up by its companion and snuck over to Han Li before unleashing a sneak attack. Even with Han Li's powerful spiritual sense, he had completely failed to detect its approach. When those sharp claws made contact with the protective gray light around his body, it was already too late for him to adopt any evasive measures. The sharp claws swiped through the air to summon a series of claw projections, which instantly slashed through the gray light before hurtling toward Han Li's back like lightning. At this moment, Han Li finally detected what was happening behind him, and he let loose a loud cry as the golden and silver lightning robe surfaced over his body. A loud thunderclap erupted as golden and silver arcs of lightning radiated from the lightning robe, crashing into the claw projections amid a resounding boom. After being struck by the arcs of lightning, the pair of arms to which the claws were attached began to smoke and char. However, the claws themselves continued onward as if they were divine weapons, instantly puncturing the lightning en route to Han Li's back. However, right at this moment, 4 indistinct golden arms suddenly sprouted from Han Li's back before unleashing a seemingly nonchalant attack toward the pair of claws. Even though they were set into motion after the claw strikes were unleashed, they somehow managed to seize back the initiative, keeping the sharp claws at bay as they clashed amid a sharp screeching sound of metal grating on metal. Crimson light flashed from the claws, and the 4 golden arms were immediately shattered. However, during this brief moment of respite, Han Li was able to hurtle through the air as a white line. Over 200 feet away, spiritual light flashed as Han Li appeared again, appraising the demented minion that had just attacked him with a dark expression. The demented minion appeared to be rather surprised that its sneak attack had been thwarted, and its eyes darted around in a display of bewilderment. On the other end, the woman also flew back several hundred feet after the divine essence-effused mountain withstood the crimson threads for her. Those crimson threads converged toward the center, manifesting back into the demented minion's original beastly form, and it turned to appraise the woman with a ferocious light in its eyes. The 2 demented minions had clearly already picked their respective opponents. "Let's act according to the plan," Han Li suddenly said. "All right," the woman nodded without any hesitation as she flipped her hand over to summon a disc. Meanwhile, white light flashed from her other hand, and she slammed her palm heavily into the disc. A series of spluttering sounds rang out as 36 small flags of different colors appeared over 1,000 feet away, in a circular formation, with the demented minions at the very center. When those small flags first emerged, they were only around an inch in size each. However, they swelled rapidly at the woman's behest, expanding to over 100 feet in size in the blink of an eye. Each and every flag had runes shimmering on their surfaces and were emanating fearsome spiritual qi. Almost at the exact same moment, Han Li made a hand seal, and a series of shimmering golden threads appeared within these flags. These threads then immediately converged toward the demented minion in a rapid and purposeful manner.